him as the answer.
Oh, really?
Thank you. Good. Yeah. The House Budget Review Committee will come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Curry. Here. Belloc. Arroyo. Bradley.
Here.
Brady. Cabello. Crespo.
Happy to be back, present.
Davis. Duncan.
Yes.
Harris. David Harris. Greg Harris. Morrison. Pritchard.
We have a quorum. We also have some extra members with us, and we are delighted to welcome members of the House who are not part of the committee, and they will be welcome to participate in the discussion as well as enjoy hearing the testimony. The purpose of the committee is just to get a better handle on the priorities the administration has with respect to programmatic issues in the coming budget year, to get a handle on how decisions are made and what priorities are. Today's hearing is focused on the Department of Human Services and the Department of Public Health and the decisions that were recently made to freeze, to stop payments for particular programs. We want to know more about the reasoning that went into those decisions. We also anticipate that we will hear from the Illinois State Board of Education. In the legislation passed a few weeks ago, we allocated $97 million to the state board in order to be able to fill holes that were unanticipated or were expected at the end of the day to lead to serious problems in individual school districts. We want to find out what kind of plans they have for tracking that information, and we want to know whether there are school districts that they already are preparing to cut checks to help avoid closure or other kinds of problems. So with that, I'd like to give the opportunity to Representative Bradley, if he'd like to say a few words, and then I'm going to recognize Representative Belloc, who is the minority spokesman, for any opening remarks, and then we'll move right into the agenda. Representative Bradley. Please add Representative Arroyo to the roll.
I am honored and humbled to assist the majority leader in this process, to work with our appropriation chairs as well as our friends across the aisle as the Republicans, to work through the issues involving decisions that have been made, decisions that are being made, and decisions that will be made in this budget and the upcoming budget. And we're ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work. So, Majority Leader, I look forward to assisting you in this process.
Representative Belloc.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. And we also look forward to working in a bipartisan manner to address these issues. We know that there are tough days ahead in order to get our budget back on track. And we look forward to all decisions being made and in the future in trying to get this budget of 2016 in order, and also solutions, if need be more, to the 2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representatives Bradley and Belloc. Our first witness is representatives from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Tim Nuding is with us, and he has a sidekick. Perhaps you'll introduce the sidekick to us as well. So take it away, Mr. Nuding.
Thank you, Leader. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Nuding, Governor's Office of Management and Budget. I am joined by Secretary Bassey from the Department of Human Services. We also have Director Shaw from Public Health available if necessary. I don't really have much of an opening statement. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to start an important dialogue, not only about the FY15 budget and the actions that we are taking to try and close budget deficit along those lines, and appreciate your help with House Bills 317 and 318 to move forward on that, and to also begin to discuss either today or in the future the FY16 budget and trying to achieve a balanced budget for the people of Illinois. Thank you.
Are there questions from members of the panel? Representative Harris.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
So part of the process, I think, of us working together is the ability to understand, trust and share information in a timely manner so that we know how decisions are being made and are fully informed, and we may agree or disagree with the conclusions, but at least both the executive and the legislative branches are participating in those. So, one of the things that sort of confounded me was, I think the governor issued his executive order regarding essential and non-essential services on January 13th. Is that correct?
I believe it was probably January 12th, his first day in
January 12th,
office.
so it was early January, and it was on April 10th then that, after a lot of requests, that we finally even got a list of the programs that were under consideration for reserve or elimination. And why did it take that long to get lists of those things that were under consideration for the legislature to look at?
Yeah, that's a good question, Representative, and I appreciate the question and the opportunity to explain. Maybe it would be instructive if I just, as we share information here, give you an idea of the process as it has unfolded. And as you know, Governor Rauner took office on January 12th, facing a giant budget deficit of $1.6 billion. We did not come in and inherit a process that was already in place. No corrective action had been taken by the prior administration, despite the fact that everybody knew there was a huge budget deficit. So on January 12th, we started our own process to begin to dive in and not only identify what the problems were, but try to identify what some of the solutions were. And the executive order was a piece of that. And just in terms of trying to close what is a massive $1.6 billion hole, the first thing we looked at was what are the types of things the administration can do on our own? Okay, so where can we reserve spending? Where can we freeze spending? What can we do on our own? And candidly, when you look at the budget, and I'm sitting here with a lot of APROP chairmen and spokespersons, so I know that I'm speaking to an educated group, but when you look at the GRF budget, and you look at we're 7 months into a fiscal year, even in my position, I felt like there would be a lot of areas where we could really reduce spending and maybe try to get this thing under control. And the more we looked into it, and you start going through the big pieces of the budget, whether you start with education, where we really didn't want to do a lot of reductions if we could avoid it. Higher education, where a lot of the universities had spent out a lot of their GRF approaches already. Pensions, where you can't reduce because it's mandated by law. Debt service, where you can't reduce because it's mandated by law. Human services, which is a major agency but was actually underfunded in many areas, and that was a reason that we pursued the supplemental on child care. Public safety, which was an agency that was underfunded, so there weren't a lot of areas for corrective action there. By the time we got through all of those areas where we could look at the universe of options to make reductions, it became readily apparent that we were not going to be able to get there on reductions alone. So the universe was not as big as I had imagined and probably not as big as you would have imagined. And that's why we started with reserves, we started with the executive order, and candidly, it took a lot of time to work with our agencies and get them looking at what they could do on their own, what had been spent out, what's going to hurt federal match if we do it, those types of things. Once we got done with that exercise, candidly, there was not a lot of savings associated with that. Maybe in the range of $40 to $45 million statewide. So then we got into, we said we got to go deeper, we got to look at other things. This is when we got into the grant suspension issue that we're probably going to get into discussing a lot more today. We started looking at where there were grant agreements that we could go in and they hadn't spent them all out, where we could suspend those and try and generate more savings. So that was step number 2. Step number 3 was coming to the legislature and trying to look for additional powers to save money. And again, Medicaid program is a perfect example. Everything is pretty much written in statute, so the governor on his own can't do much in the Medicaid program. So part 3 was coming to the legislature, and as we worked with the legislature, we were continuing on a dual track to try and do these other things on our own. But Representative, it took time to analyze these and figure out where we could make these reductions. I think we stayed in constant contact with your staff. I apologize if you feel like we weren't timely with the information, but we are truly trying to get you as much information as we can in an accurate fashion when we have it, but it's just a process that takes time at this point.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the hard feelings that come out of this process seem to be around, people felt very surprised by different actions, which if there had been more information going back and forth, and I think some of the surprises could have been eliminated. And there's also the surprise that that's felt not by people in this room, but by people back at home. Just a couple weeks before the Good Friday cuts were announced. I mean, not too long before. I know the governor had been out to a rally of immigrants and refugees, and he talked about the importance of the immigrant and refugee community and the programs that support them becoming full participants in our democracy, and how the state wants to stand with them. I've been at a breakfast with the governor where he was talking to a group of people who raise money to provide services and supports to people with AIDS. And the same thing. The governor got up and said, "You are really important to this state. I'm proud to stand with you. I'm proud to help you. We've got to do everything we can to support you." Then Good Friday comes around and boom, you're cut off. So is that a question? Is there a lack of communication between the things the governor goes out and says and then the actions that Gombe takes, or how do we go back and explain that at home?
Well, I don't think there's and you've highlighted a few, Representative. I don't think there's a disconnect between what the governor believes and what we've been doing. You've highlighted a few programs that were suspended. I mean, the breadth of what we've done at GOMB is far and wide, and it's not relegated just to those. The governor has talked about the importance of business and growing jobs and growing the economy and having a good business environment, yet we made many, many grant suspensions at DCEO that impact job training grants or coal technology or grants to other businesses. There's a lot of that. The grant suspensions are far and wide. We've suspended DNR grants. He's talked about the importance of the environment. I mean, this budget hole is so dramatic that we have to look at just about every area of government, and we have done that. And you've highlighted some of those, and I've highlighted some of those. Doesn't mean the governor doesn't think particular areas are not important, but having a balanced budget is a constitutional requirement.
But we understand that the governor supports business, because I think last week there was $100 million in tax credits given out to various businesses. So, we understand, that those actions said we value, corporations and, what they bring to Illinois. But still then, people who are struggling to figure out, how do they keep their families afloat, or wondering, well, actions speak louder than words. What about the words that said, you're important to, Illinois families, and you're cut?
Yeah, well, those tax credits had zero fiscal impact on FY15, so not an issue in terms of trying to close the gap. Again, we have looked at everything, and I think we've looked at everything that we can pare back. We have a $30+ billion budget. We've made suspensions and grant freezes that are going to total less than $500 million overall. So this government is still funding a lot of important priorities, and frankly, we've had to suspend spending on some important priorities as well.
So how do you define essential versus non-essential things?
Yeah, so
what's essential?
It's broad, and it's been defined before as important to the public health and welfare of the state of Illinois. That's too broad. I think it's fair to say that the executive order did identify the terms essential and non-essential, and we have used those terms in the past, but it became quickly apparent to us that it's not an appropriate term. Some of the things that we've had to do, we've suspended good programs. We have, because we simply don't have the money to pay for them. And I think Director Bassey can speak more to that in just a moment, but we have had to suspend some good programs. There's no question about it. These are very difficult decisions that have to be made to balance the budget. Do I personally wish they would have been made last May? I do. but they weren't. We inherited a horribly unbalanced budget, and we are working to the best of our ability to balance it and fix the problem.
So I think we gave about 1.3 billion in fund sweep authority.
1.366, yes, sir.
And we've never seen maybe you have it today, you can tell us, where'd that money go?
The sweeps money, your staff has a list of where those sweeps would be coming from. And in fact, they were spelled out in the bill that you passed.
Well, not where they were coming from, but
yes,
where
sir.
did they, where
the
did they?
1.366 is spelled out in the bill.
Okay, so can you explain what you spent the 1.366 billion on? Because it wasn't, autism, it wasn't immigrant services, it wasn't after-school programming for youth. Where did it go?
A lot of it goes to fill revenue shortfall, because we do have revenue shortfall. As you know, the budget that was passed last May relied on borrowing for operations, which is a terrible fiscal practice that the governor has said he does not want to continue. It's the reason that we find ourselves in this position today, that we've continued to borrow for operations. So that was $650 million, so some of that revenue needed to replace that borrowing. In addition,
but that was borrowing from those funds, so
we did not borrow, sir.
But you said that the budget was based on borrowing from the funds, so it's your point that you'd rather just take the money and not pay it back from those funds?
That's exactly correct, because if we just reallocate the money from those other funds, which are state funds, then we can help solve the FY15 problem and not get a $650 million payback bill in FY16, only further enhancing our problems in the FY16 budget. So it's not ideal, but it's certainly better than borrowing.
So let's get back to the first question then. Where did the 1.366 billion get expended?
Yeah, so it's fungible. It goes into the GRF, but I will tell you that a lot of it went to close the revenue gaps. Much of it went to fund other areas of concern that we expressed and that you expressed as well. The child care program, which was underfunded by $300 million knowingly in last year's budget. The correctional system, which was knowingly underfunded in last year's budget, where we needed an additional $100 million plus to make sure that we could make payroll at all of the correctional facilities. The court reporter issue, which wasn't funded in the budget last year, which is critical to the operation of our court system. Those priorities have been funded as part of the House Bill 370.
Do you have a list of, starting with 1.366, here's how much went to child care and here's how much went to corrections, or is it just, well, we're going to spend it as...
Well, yeah, I can tell you how much went to child care and corrections. It was, again, that was in the bill. We allocated an additional about $300 million to child care, and I think the number was about 117 to the Department of Corrections.
Yeah. The interesting thing about child care, one of the reasons that it ended up costing us a little bit more than we thought is, I think there's two things. I think this, it's interesting, and it shows that programs actually work. So I'm glad we were able to find money to find it. One, I think a lot of folks went back to work, and parents who had been able to stay at home and take care of their kids were able to get jobs, and as the economy improved and they went back into the workplace, there was an increased demand for child care. But the other thing was the state made a informed decision, and this is sort of the Birth Through 5 initiative that Governor Quinn and Governor Rauner have both supported, saying we need to provide better child care services to provide for early development of kids. Actually costs us more as a state, so our costs definitely grew. So these are two outcomes of processes and plans that actually are good, but they did cost us more money.
Yeah, and I think we're in agreement, and the governor supported the money for child care, believed it was important to make sure that those providers were funded so that low-income folks who are working could continue to work, and that's why we suggested and agreed with you that that money should be included in that bill. And again, we wish it was included in the May budget that was passed last year, and that we didn't have to worry about it in the middle of the year. But
So
we are happy about that we
Yeah.
were able to get that
I
program.
think we're all happy about it. So I think in your FY16 introduced budget, then you propose a $135 million cut to child care again?
We proposed $1 billion for child care in next year's budget. It's a major commitment, and we intend to see it through.
But if my memory serves me from looking at the budget sheet, wasn't there a reduction?
We would look for some efficiencies in that program, no question about it. We would be glad to work with you on that. The child care program is important. It's a program that has actually, over the last 7 years, served the same number of kids while costs have gone up 50 to 60%. So we'd like to look at what some of the cost drivers are in that program and identify them to maybe generate some efficiencies while serving the same number of children. We don't understand why. We'd like to serve more kids if possible, but the costs are going up and the number of kids served are not going up in that program. So,
But I know this is an FY15 discussion, but aren't your FY16 proposals to stop serving kids above 6 years old and leave them home alone?
in that proposal it is. We'd be glad to talk with you about that. We're trying to, in talking with advocates, they believe that those services are more effective for the younger age of child, especially in the child development area. So that was a policy focus. If you have different opinions, we certainly
I
will
think
be
the
glad to work
advocates who
with you.
come to me, sir, I don't want to take up everyone's time, so thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Please add Representatives Cabello, Davis, and Brady to the roll call. Just a quick comment. My understanding is that you're right, that the number of kids served in our daycare program has not significantly grown, but my understanding is that we're providing a better quality of care than we used to, that if you've got people who have better training in early childhood education, it may cost us more to provide them with services, but that I would say would be a good thing. I would think that it would be helpful to make sure that the children that we are sustaining and supporting in daycare are getting access to quality programs, and I think that's what the evidence actually shows.
Thank you, Leader. I would agree with it, that that's a part of it. There have also been rate increases, reductions in co-pays. There are a lot of other factors going on. I would say to you that the migration toward more expensive care in the centers is probably a good thing.
We all appreciate parents having choices and being able to direct their kids into places that are providing better quality.
We are in agreement, Leader.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we have other people are anxious to speak, ask questions. Representative Crespo is next, followed by Representative Ammons, and yes, and then Belloc.
Thank you, Leader Curry. Just noting, thank you for joining us. Secretary Bassey, good seeing you again. A couple of questions. You know, we can sit here and belabor over much on what's essential and non-essential. I'm not even going to go there. I think this administration has already shown what they consider to be non-essential. It is what it is. I'm more concerned about the process.
Yeah.
So help me understand who determines and recommends what's non-essential. I know the governor's going to base his decisions based on, I'm not sure if it's you, if you go to the agency directors. I'm just trying to get my arms around the process. And I'll tell you why I think this is important. And I appreciate the fact that you talked about your probe chair saying that this is an educated group. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but thank you very much. But as we move forward, I think it's really critical for us to understand who's making those recommendations as we move forward. So can you tell us, Mr. Nutty, who decides, who determines, and who recommends what's non-essential?
Well, again, we looked at programs on varying levels.
But when you say we,
well, okay,
so drill down
yeah,
to the very
so the
basic.
process is my office, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, certainly plays a major role in the discussions about what gets funded or what doesn't get funded. But we rely very heavily on the agencies who are the experts and the program people in those agencies who know how those programs operate and know which ones are more effective than others. And candidly, a lot of the decisions in a mid-year representative are simply decisions of opportunity. What is out there that can be reduced? What hasn't spent out? Where can we legally suspend grant agreements and those types of things. So from a financial and process perspective, that's how it works. If you want to delve deeper into the program decisions, I would yield to Secretary Bassey for that.
Sure.
Sure, and I can weigh in on that. From a DHS perspective, the approach that we took was really bottom up. So we started with, the executive order came in January, and given the very real and present fiscal crisis that the state was in, we had to start looking at our programs to determine what we could, if reductions had to be made or suspensions had to be done, where could that take place, and we could still preserve what we determined to be our core services within DHS. Now, in taking that approach, the first thing we had to look at was, number one, what's even available? What can be reduced? I mean, a number of things. There's obviously federal funded. We had to look at what was Medicaid, what was court or federally mandated, and what was court mandated, which a lot of DHS expenditures are, based on various consent decrees and obviously federal law. But we took an approach from the bottom up with the program personnel within each division. And as you know, we have 5 separate divisions within DHS. We've got the Division of Mental Health, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, the Division of Alcohol and Substance Abuse, the Division of Rehabilitation Services, and the Division of Family and Community Services. So our program personnel in each of those divisions started looking at our programs. And once you determine that we're going to continue to maintain our Medicaid covered, our Medicaid waiver programs for in-home supports for those with developmentally disabled, which fall within the Medicaid waiver program. When you look at those that are federally mandated, after you take out those that are court mandated, as Director Newting said, the pie's not that big. So we're left with about $900 million in grants that are even possible that could be suspended or discontinued. And that's $900 million on an annual basis, not looking at middle of the year, what's available. And from there, more than half of that, about 55%, is dedicated to the grants that cover child care within DHS. So you're looking at less than $450 million that's available, and that's on an annual basis again. And from there, we took, okay, what is core and what is non-core? What are the traditional services that form the base of the services that we provide? And that varies division by division. If you're looking at things like mental health and developmental disabilities, our traditional core services are those 24-hour care for people in need or people in crisis. From family and community services perspective, it's housing and food for people that don't have the means otherwise to access those resources. And once you get to that point, you have to look at which of those services that we provide through our grants are more of the educational and outreach and referral services. Those were determined, while all extremely valuable, that provide excellent service to good people, they weren't part of that core service. So for this year of the grant suspensions, I would say the majority fall into that category where they're the kinds of services that allow people to access our core or our base services. And then from there are some others that still do not fall within that traditional core service. And we tried to find areas where there was potential for maybe some other organizations or other funding sources that might help fill the gap. And I know that it's not going to be the same level of service, and I know that those affected by the suspensions, it's very real, and the impact is complete for those people. But it was an incredibly difficult process, and we tried to make the best of a very difficult and crisis situation, really.
Thank you, Mr. Bassey. So I think you did answer my question. So it's pretty much at least at DHS, a bottom-up process. So you talk to the program personnel. That went up to, I guess just went up the ladder, got to you. you met with OMB and you guys decided, hey, this is what my staff and my folks are telling me. And just for the record, again, Mr. Bassi, you are currently the acting secretary, right?
That's correct.
You're an attorney?
I am.
And what's your background in human services?
I don't have a lot of background in human services.
Okay.
I've done volunteer.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
And this is, we've been asking this question for quite some time. So I know the governor made some appointments, and I forgot the date. When he appointed you acting director, he made some other appointments as well. And we found out that he appointed a Jason Turner director at the same time. So while he appointed you acting director, for a brief moment, there was a Jason Turner that was appointed director. I understand later on that was taken back. Can you tell us who's Jason Turner? Let me tell you why. Number one, I was somewhat intrigued when I saw that when you were named acting director, there was a director being appointed as well. This Jason Turner, who I don't know, I've never met, by the way, but just talking to DHS personnel, my understanding is that he's been going around meeting with different groups. I guess you know that because I guess he works for you, since you're the acting director. And I've been told that he's telling folks that he's the functional director. I'm not sure what that means, but this is what I've heard him telling other folks. I did ask the Audit Commission to reach out to your department, because we met during the audit hearing a month ago or something like that. And our Audit Commission was informed that he's actually the Chief of Staff. So he's the Chief of Staff?
That's correct.
So what role did he play during this process in terms of making recommendations? The reason I'm asking you, Mr. Bass, is as I talked to DHS personnel, it seems like he took a very active role. So that's my first question. Number two, who is he? What's his background? And is he the functional director?
I will answer that question. Number one, he was never appointed acting secretary of DHS. I have always been the acting secretary of DHS. As part of this transition process, the governor recognized that he wanted people with expertise and experience to help through the transition. Jason Turner has experience in Wisconsin and New York City and in Washington, D.C. with human services. So we brought him on, and he has been acting as our chief of staff through the transition. I can tell you that I rely on him on policy decisions in certain areas where he has the expertise and the breadth of knowledge that I don't have, because I don't have that human services background. At no time was he acting secretary, and he will not be acting secretary. And I can tell you that he had no involvement in this process at all, none whatsoever. I was involved in this process with our budget folks to make these determinations. It's a fluid process in this transition. We do not yet have a permanent secretary. He's not the only person I rely on. We have folks within our agency that also have a large breadth of knowledge. We've brought back the former chief of staff, Grace Hong-Duffin, who is acting as a senior policy advisor who I rely on extremely heavily. We have Melissa Wright, who acted in the acting secretary role for about 2 weeks before I came on board, who I rely on daily for help and assistance through this transition. And Bob Brock, who's our CFO, and in this particular context, was the main person that I relied on to get through this process and make these decisions.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you said this Jason Turner, he's had experience in Wisconsin, New York, and where else?
Washington, D.C. He worked under the first Bush administration.
Mr. Bassett, your appointment as acting secretary, is there a termination date, or is it pretty much open until they find a secretary?
There is a termination date. I want to say it's another year out, but I know that the governor's office is looking extremely hard to find somebody to place in this position.
Okay, thank you.
And so I don't anticipate that my termination date, which is a year out, barring a sea change, I do not believe I'll be in this position that long. But as long as the governor needs me, I am working my butt off to make this work.
Okay. Now, some of these suspensions, by the way, Mr. Nuding, I understand that the governor is asking that we suspend the grants now, and I think in some cases he's actually recommending that we terminate the programs in 2016, correct?
Yeah, I believe in some cases that's accurate, yes, sir.
And some of those programs are there by statute, so I would imagine there's going to be some legislation getting rid of the programs. Is that the intent?
I would expect, as would be the normal process, that in determinations with the legislature on what will or will not be funded in FY16, there would be an accompanying BIMP bill or BIMP bills that would make the requisite substantive changes needed to implement that budget. Okay.
And my last point, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Good Friday surprise that Greg Harris talked about. And so when House Bills 317 and 318 were introduced, I actually supported that bill. You know, it's like anything else that we pass, nothing is perfect. But there's some key components there, and one that Speaker Madigan actually stated during the House debate, and he said that mental health would not be impacted by this. To me, that was key. And I voted for this bill, notwithstanding the fact that there were some bad things in that bill. But you know, after 8 years in office, I realized nothing is perfect. So as you can imagine, on Good Friday, we heard that autism is cut. I was having a difficult time reconciling that. Yeah. You know, and I haven't talked to the speaker to ask him, why did you tell us that mental health was being protected? And we found on Good Friday that, wait a second, there was a cut. Looking back, I think that would have impacted how I would have voted on House Bills 317 and 318. But let me tell you something else. Yes, for a matter of perspective here, and this is not meant to be critical of anything. Last year, former Governor Quinn introduced a recommended budget and a non-recommended budget. And as you can suspect, we did pass a recommended budget with Democratic votes. And that's what I suspected. I didn't expect Republican votes on that recommended budget. And I was asked to introduce on the House floor the non-recommended budget, which pretty much factored in the fact that the income tax was going to go away. That non-recommended budget was not as bad as what this administration is asking for today. And I expected, when I ran the not-recommended budget, I'm like, okay, I don't expect any Democrats to vote for this thing, right? I expect some Republicans to support me on this. Because again, it's what they're saying. We should let the income tax increase sunset. I ran the bill, the not-recommended budget, not as bad as this administration's recommended budget. Mr. Newting only got 5 votes. I voted for the darn thing because I had to present the bill. I think Speaker Madigan voted for it too because he did ask me to vote for the bill. And I had 3 other Democrats who voted for it. I thought I had more friends than that, so I was a little bit disappointed. You know how many Republicans voted for that? 0. And that's fine. And the reason I'm saying this is we passed the supplemental bill 317 and 318, and this new administration had the benefit and it has the courtesy to get some Democratic votes on that bill. It wasn't a partisan roll call. We had some Democratic votes might include it. But I'll tell you this, if we keep seeing these surprises moving forward, like we saw on Good Friday, that goodwill might not be there. I can only speak for myself, but I would suspect that some of the Democrats who supported this administration are taken aback and might feel the same way. So again, it's just putting things in perspective. I think we're giving this governor, this administration, the courtesy to say, hey, we want to work with you, but these surprises, and again, I'm not going to belabor over much on what's essential and non-essential. I already know where this administration stands on that. Yeah. But as we move forward, especially as an approach share, I hope that you keep that in mind.
May I comment on that, Leader? Because I think that's a very important point.
Briefly, you may.
Representative Crespo, thank you for raising that issue. That issue is of great importance to me. I want you to know that I feel like I communicated through all the proper channels about my intentions. I appeared before the House Executive Committee. I was asked a direct question from Leader Martino, whether the reserves would continue or what would happen with the programs that were reserved if these bills passed. He asked me, in the course of passing this fix for this year, what will become the status of the suspended dollars? Will the status of those accounts be lifted, and may those projects resume once we have those dollars? My direct response, this bill works in concert with what we are already doing in terms of establishing reserves and looking at grants that are already out there, so that process will continue. Our agencies are evaluating, trying to figure out what can be frozen. We will continue to work through that process. We need some of those savings to make that $1.6 billion whole balance in concert with the bills that are in front of you today. I told Senator Katowski in the Senate, the point you make is a very fair one. I apologize if there was a misunderstanding. I made no commitments with regard to any of this. If I did, I would follow through on them. I'm not a creature of the House, I'm a creature of the Senate. I've spent 25 years over there establishing trust and credibility. I believe I'm a trustworthy person. I know that I have credibility. I hope to establish that with you. It troubles me greatly that we have had a miscommunication on that issue. But I feel very comfortable that I communicated my intentions, if not specifically, certainly generally, through all the appropriate channels, not only in front of the Executive Committee, but also with your staff.
And I appreciate that, and I think it's key that this trust and credibility, and I'm not saying you don't have that with me, by the way. I'm just sharing with you, after this experience, I'm just taken aback a little bit. But I hope you do understand. I mean, I'm pretty sure you heard the House floor debate, and there was a very specific statement. Yeah. Well, I know you're from the Senate, but hopefully
I did not hear the debate. Really? I did not.
Oh, well, hopefully your staff or someone will listen to the debate and relate to you. Oh, Speaker Madigan just said that mental health is going to be protected way before Good Friday. And I think as we continue working together that if you feel, hey, you guys are missing something here, you should let us know. Because I think, I hear what you're saying, I'm not disputing if that's true or not, I'm still having a very difficult time reconciling what just happened.
It's a fair point, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a housekeeping issue. We have many members who are with us this morning who are not members of the committee, and I have said that they may also ask questions. I would advise them to be particularly brief with their queries, and I want to remind everybody who is here that in addition to this committee, which is especially focused on how budgetary priorities are set by the administration, how essential, non-essential services are defined, we do have the usual Appropriations Committee hearings, which will be delving into the specifics of all of the programs that come before our purview. So if people could confine themselves to the specifics for today's hearings, and that would mean Human Services and Department of Public Health. Later we will be talking about education decisions as well. So with that, Representative Ammons is next.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for attending the hearing. I'm here. I have very specific questions. The contract requirements, I think this question is actually to Acting Secretary Bassey. Contract requirements with DHS require agencies to make certain commitments as well as the state. Can you tell us what the legal actions that you took according to those contracts with those agencies to eliminate their funding in the last quarter, and how you rectified the legal notice to the contracts that they had pending?
So within each of our community service agreements for all our providers, there is a section 4.1 that lays out circumstances like this where you're in a fiscal crisis and you're either in a situation where not sufficient funds have been appropriated, or there's just simply not enough cash as directed by GAMBI in order to continue to fund that program or that grant. And within each of our agreements, they contemplated a situation just like this. And so we sent letters giving notice to each of those agencies that were affected by the grant suspensions, and cited section 4.1 and explained that pursuant to that section of the agreement, we were suspending their particular grants.
Why didn't your office reach out to them prior to Good Friday? Why didn't they have adequate notice?
It was a very short time frame and a very short turnaround. It was only about a week after the supplemental had passed. It took GAMBI some time to work through the numbers and figure out exactly what sort of revenue was available and where the cash flow was coming from. As soon as we had that information and we were able to break it down, we needed to get our letters out as quickly as possible. We wanted those agencies to know by that Friday that their grant had been suspended, and the longer we waited, the more potential there was that additional grants might be affected if we didn't get the spending stopped at that point. And so we were under a very, very short time crunch to get this done.
And during that time of choosing the organizations that you decided to cut, were there increases in other line items?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So where we cut maybe 22 programs here, 100%, and some across the board there, were there increases in any other line items for that budget?
No other line items were increased.
Were there any increases in personnel salary or any administrative costs?
I can't speak to that.
Maybe OMB can answer that one.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. No. There were no increases to any other programs other than those that were set out in the bill passed by the legislature, such as the child care program, the early intervention program, that did receive supplemental appropriations through the bills that you supported and we also supported. There were no increases in operating lines. In fact, I believe without exception, all operating lines were reduced by 2.25% in the bill, just like most other lines.
Okay, I just want to correct that. I didn't support this because, one, we asked for months for a list of programs that were potentially going to be cut so that we can inform our constituency. We didn't get that. There was a clear lack of transparency, and when the letters went out on Friday, Good Friday, none of the members knew what was going on, and when we tried to make contact to get clarity, it was still unclear what was actually happening. So the lack of transparency certainly makes me very uncomfortable to look at what is being proposed as a legitimate solution to our budgetary problems. The other part of that is there is no current list, or is there a current list, of where all of the money actually went. So you swept funds from here, but I haven't seen a list of where every single dollar went. Is there a place where I can go and get that list?
Well, it's all fungible. I mean, it all goes into the
No, I don't want to find it. I want you to tell me where it is so I can go get it.
Okay, so we will, as I mentioned to Representative Crespo, the appropriations bills for the most part lay out where much of the money went in terms of the child care program, the Department of Corrections, the court reporters, and much of that went to fill revenue gaps that were created by the budget passed last year, to fill the hole, so to speak, of the unbalanced budget that passed the legislature last May.
So I know you're a very intelligent man, and I would ask on behalf of the people of my district that all of the cuts that we do have a complete list for, we would also like a complete list in the same format as all of the revenue and where it went, that we can go to your website and simply click on a link and find that complete list. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Representative Duncan. Is he here? Huh? Okay, Representative Duncan had to leave for a bit. Representative Belloc was next on the list.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Nuding and Acting Director Bassey, for coming before us today. We appreciate all the work that you've been doing, and just want to go over a few things because when we set out this year, we knew coming in, and the administration and the governor knew coming in, that we were coming into a state that was really on the brink of financial disaster, which we've talked about for the last couple of years, how important it was to balance the budget. And I know that you've come in under tough decisions, and we respect that. You know, we had been downgraded, I think, over 20 times by the bond houses over the last several years. And moving into the 2016 budget, we knew that that was going to be a tough budget because those of us that serve on the budget committee felt that the 2015 budget was underfunded at the time. And that's why when we had, you know, for those of us that serve on human services, we had all the child care people in here 3 weeks ago, and we were just determined to try to find a solution so that we could fund those people, so that we could fund the court reporters, and so that we could fund corrections. So we know that you were trying to assist in that, and we all knew, especially the people that are here today, that are the heads of the approach committees, their heart-wrenching decisions have to be made. And, you know, whatever the timing may be, we know that we wanted to keep those people in. And I think that with the 2015 budget, as some others have brought up, we jeopardized a lot of the funding of social services, human services, and business in that budget. You know, so right now, I think what we're trying to do today and moving forward is to work with you on what decisions and solutions we can do to move forward on whatever, if we're, you know, still discussing the 2015 budget, but also the 2016 budget, because that's what we're trying to do in accomplishing a real balanced budget. And whatever decisions we want to try to make together and look at them. But I think that the administration, I say that I understand what you were trying to accomplish in those tough decisions, and I know there are a lot of people that have real concerns, including myself, because we're in the trenches dealing with people, and I know you are out there trying to turn the state around and to have a balanced budget this year in 2016 and to pay the bills, because all of us care about the people and the families in our communities throughout the state of Illinois. We care about the healthcare issues. We care about the human service. We want to bring businesses back to Illinois. We're tired of hearing about the out-migration in Illinois, and we want to bring that back. And I think the answer to that problem is to get a balanced budget in 2016 and to try to make the best choices and priorities of the programs that serve the most people that are essential. You know, so I look forward in this committee to working with you and to working all the others that serve on this committee into moving forward on solutions to these issues. Thank you very much.
All right, next we have Representative Wallace. Again, be brief because you're not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate you each coming before us this morning. I will say I do appreciate Assistant or Acting Secretary Bassett's leaning on other individuals with expertise in human services. As a doctor in educational psychology and a former family therapist, human services is very dear to me. My couple of questions are, what forms of communication were utilized to get the message out? So this is kind of picking back up where Representative Ammons left off. I know she requested a specific list moving forward, but on Thursday evening or Good Friday morning, what forms of communication were used to reach out to the members of the House and Senate regarding these decisions?
Yeah, I'll take that, Representative. And again, I think, as I mentioned to Representative Crespo, that's a fair point. Moving forward, we are continuing to share as much information as we can. We could have provided more specific information in that instance, and I regret not doing that. We are doing that going forward. I think you have lists of all of the programs where we have either reserve spending or suspended spending. I believe you have a list of DCEO projects that have been suspended. You have the DHS and public health projects that have been suspended. Going forward, when other actions will be taken, and other actions, frankly, will be taken, we will be doing a better job of communicating that with your staff so that they can communicate with you on what is happening.
I would greatly appreciate that. My senator and I were completely blindsided, and so that's neither here nor there. Let's move forward. My next question is just simply, how is it that we're not sure these cuts in terms of human services and public health, how have we determined whether or not those cuts are simply shifting costs? For example, we understand that some of the outreach programs for teens help reduce crime. We understand that child care services help for individuals to be able to be in the workforce. Were it not for those very programs, I would not have completed my doctoral degree. I'm trying to understand how are we so sure that we're not shifting cost? Because an incarcerated individual costs us tens upon thousands of dollars each year versus a $600 a year funding for a teen to attend an after-school program?
I think the answer to that, and it's not a great one, is that we're not sure what the overall impact of some of these is going to be. We're in a situation that has rightly been termed an emergency. It's a crisis, and we're making the most as we go. It's an inexact science, and it's not a perfect solution, but it's the best solution we have in an emergency. And so we didn't have the luxury of analyzing each program by program what the long-term effect and what the long-term costs would be. That said, other programs that did not get reduced or suspended also provide, long-term gains that are essential to this state. And so the overall picture is what we try to look at, and then we look at what can we get through this year, what is needed for this year in an emergency in order to balance the budget. And so that's the approach that we took, and so I'm afraid that's the best answer I can give you.
I do appreciate that. I just think we need to make sure that in trying to get out of this crisis, we don't create future crises. And I would believe, or I'm pretty sure that there has to be formulary efforts that we could take to kind of figure out that cost benefit and future projections of what these cuts actually could mean in the future. There are plenty of ways to mathematically figure that out, and I hope that we will do that in the future.
Thank you. Representative David Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just very briefly, if I can, I'd like to, in some historical context, go back to what my esteemed colleague, the chairman of the General Services Appropriations Committee, made reference to earlier. And he does have more than 4 friends in the House when he put forward a governor's not recommended budget. The reason that we all voted against that non-recommended budget, because quite frankly, that budget was as phony as all of the other budgets that the former governor used to put forward. It was not based in reality at all. And one of the reasons it wasn't based in reality was it failed to consider the fact that we had $1.6 billion from the April surprise that was sitting out there that was not factored in. That budget was simply based on the revenue estimate of a lower tax receipts or lower revenue receipts. I'd also like to comment about the fact that the budget process is not just a single vote in the House, but rather contains 5 votes in the House of the individual appropriations bills. And if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will reference the fact that there were indeed at least one legislator who voted for both the General Services Appropriations budget as well as the education budget as well as the supplemental appropriations budget. So it was not totally a strict partisan vote. Having said that, Mr. Newting, a couple of questions regarding the grant terminations, if I may. Were the grant terminations retroactive, or were they simply prospective? In other words, did they go back to January 1, or were they prospective?
I believe the vast majority of them are prospective, and I think the intent is to suspend the grant agreement, reconcile payments with those vendors or programs or whoever they may be to take care of whatever spending they have incurred under that grant agreement from that point until the suspension letter was issued, that the state will cover that, and then the remainder will be savings to the state.
Okay, that leads me then to my second question, which you may have sort of answered. There is an issue, and I've read in the paper, although I have not been contacted, but there is an issue, I mean, with the funeral and burial grants. What do you do with a dead body? I mean, we have been providing for that. How do you handle that? Are we handling it with the funeral directors or the nursing homes? I mean, what's the procedure by way of what we've been covering previously?
Yeah, and I think that one, Representative, is one where that may have been suspended as of a certain date, which would be characterized as retroactive. I'm not sure, maybe the end of December.
Mid-January.
Okay.
The middle of January. Is that, yes.
So that was the middle of January.
Middle of January.
So that was retroactive.
Yes, but they were provided notice back in. Yeah, they've been provided notice since January, so it's from that date. So although that one is retroactive, notice was provided to the providers for funeral and burial as far back as January.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to be critical here, and believe me, we have a serious financial issue that we've got to address, and I recognize the governor's trying to handle this as practically as he can by way of balancing the budget. But what do you do with a dead body? I mean, how do you handle that? I mean, there's an issue here of coverage of getting somebody buried.
It's a difficult situation. It's a very difficult situation. What we're faced with is traditionally funeral and burial costs were handled by the locality, so counties, cities, and that's the majority of states nationwide do the same. We're committed to working with those providers and with the local communities to find the best way forward, and it's not an easy solution. But we are going to have our program folks try to find a solution, but the funds just aren't there for the rest of this year to fund those programs.
Well, that may be part of an answer. You may have told me that now we're now putting the burden on the local municipalities to cover that. Whether or not that's an appropriate answer or a good answer, but it is an answer. Okay. And then the second part of this, you have talked about resumption, if perhaps additional sweeps could be made, a resumption of some of these services. Is that correct?
Yeah, that issue has been raised, and I do believe in the Senate they may be working on that. And I think what the governor has said is we are continuing to work to balance this budget. In the process of working with the legislature to get the approval to do certain things that we need to be able to do to close this gap, we lost both time and resources. So we lost 2 months of time. When you're in the middle of a fiscal year, obviously time is money. The sooner you can stop spending, the more money you can save throughout the fiscal year. We also lost resources in the sense that our list of fund reallocations that the governor was willing to approve was actually larger than what was actually approved by the legislature in House Bill 318. There were funds that we would have been okay reallocating monies from where monies sit today that the legislature was not okay with. What the governor has said is that if we are willing to revisit that, he is willing to look at that as well and may be willing to support some additional reallocations to mitigate some of the actions that we are taking to try and balance this budget.
Okay. One maybe next to the last point. You've taken a lot of heat for what you've done, and it's not easy. We understand we have to balance the budget. I would tell you that if you're going to make a statement that these things are going to be stopped, they should be stopped, because the difficulty is you can't stop them and then start them. I mean, the on again, off again. It's very difficult for an entity, for an organization, to say, okay, 1 week those children can't come into the center, and we don't know if you're ever going to be able to come into the center, and then they get word from the government that, well, the funds are back on, so now you can come into the center a month and a half or 2 months later. If you're going to make the reduction, make the reduction, stick with it. I know it's hard, and it's not easy for lots of people to hear that, but at the same time, you can't have an off again, on again. And then let me just close. We've talked about the funds. You used the term fungible. The sweeps went into general revenue.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I would suggest that you not reference the court reporters, because unless I'm mistaken, court reporters were paid out of the personal property replacement tax, and if I'm also not mistaken, the 317, 318 used personal property replacement tax funds and not general revenue for the court reporters.
Point taken.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Bradley.
Representative Harris, there's a guy sitting behind you that may be able to help you with your burial questions. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Couple of questions, and then I think we're going to move on to the real folks that are here to talk. So, I supported your supplemental appropriation. I was one of the Democrats that did that. And there was $136 million of fund sweeps in that, is that right?
1.36 billion, yes, sir.
Okay, 1.36 billion. And so you indicated that of that 1.36 billion, that money went to child care, court reporters, and Department of Corrections. That was your testimony?
Among a few other minor items.
Okay,
with
well,
the
what are those
clarification
other,
that Representative
what are
Harris
those other minor items?
Did you just ask me what comes under minor items?
You just used the term among some other minor items.
Well, you know, like I think some money, not that it's minor, but I think some money went into making sure that fracking operations could get going at the Department of Natural Resources.
How much?
Couple $2 million.
$2 million?
$2 million, I believe, sir.
What was the amount that was put into child care from the 1.36 billion?
It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $280 million.
And what was the court reporters?
260 million. 260 million.
Into child care?
Into child care, yes.
Okay, and then the court reporters actually came out of PPRT, as Representative Harris indicated, so that wasn't actually paid from the fund sweep transfers, correct?
I believe.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's accurate, yes, sir.
Okay, so we can take that off the list. We can add DNR for $2 million. And then the other, is that right?
That's correct.
And then Department of Corrections was how much?
114 for corrections and another 5 for DJJ.
Okay, and DJJ was 5. So, doing some quick math here, but I've got about, I don't know, $400 million here that you've identified from the 1.36 billion. So, I think all of us would like to see a list and are hereby requesting a list of where the rest of that 700, that was more than that, isn't it? $900 million
900.
That we helped you with,
Yep.
that we worked in a bipartisan manner with,
Yep.
went.
Yeah.
Okay? So I know you referenced earlier that it was laid out in the supplemental appropriation bill, correct?
The appropriations were, yes, sir.
But autism was funded in that, and it's not funded now. So we would like to see a list of where that other $900 million went. Now, in last year's budget, which David Harris indicated was bipartisan as well, there was $650 million. $650 million of interfund borrowing that the legislature authorized and was signed into law by the administration, correct?
By the prior administration, correct.
Right, the prior administration, that's fair. So there was $650 million of interfund borrowing authorized by the legislature, signed into law by the prior administration, which is still in effect for fiscal year 2015, correct?
Yeah.
And that was never exercised by the Quinn administration, correct?
That's correct.
And
no corrective action was taken by the Quinn administration.
Well, we can all agree to that, and the results of that are you're here, right?
That's exactly right, Representative.
And we're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you
We're
for
trying.
that acknowledgement. I appreciate that.
So you and your administration has not exercised that interfund borrowing either, correct?
That is why we pursued the fund reallocations with you. In the list you're compiling up there, you should add $650 million of those fund reallocations went to replace that borrowing authority so that we would not borrow for operations.
But you still have the authority, right?
We do, yes, sir, and we will not. We do not choose to exercise.
So, Director Newting, are you here today telling us under no circumstances are you going to exercise that interfund borrowing authority in this fiscal budget?
Representative, respectfully, we hope to persuade you and others that borrowing for operations is a bad idea. It only creates bigger problems down the road. We want to stop the practice of borrowing for operations. We want to stop the practice of pushing off bills. And we would like to pass, with your help, balanced budgets so that we can avoid crisis governing, which is what we're doing right here today.
But you're not ruling it out.
Oh, yes, sir, I'm ruling it out.
So under no circumstances will you exercise the $650 million of interfund borrowing authority that you're still authorized to do?
Under no foreseen circumstances.
So how long have you been in the governor's office now? 4 months?
It seems like 2 years, Representative.
Just 2 years? So I seem to recall a long time ago, back when computers were a new thing, spending a lot of time in school trying to figure out what foreseeable meant.
Yeah.
So your answer is, under what circumstances you may exercise interfund borrowing? Unforeseen circumstances?
Unforeseen, I don't have a dictionary, but I think that means I can't see what they are. Nothing pops into my mind, sir.
Well, that authority is there.
It is.
And it's not been terminated.
It's ill-advised.
And it was not terminated under the supplemental appropriation that we agreed to.
I wish it were.
But it wasn't.
Correct.
Okay. Now, did you terminate all state grant programs when you did this round of grant program eliminations?
Did we terminate?
Did you terminate them all? Did you terminate all state grant programs?
No, and in fact, technically we haven't terminated grant programs. We've suspended them, which leaves open the possibility that that could be revisited. But no. No, I mean, and I think that's a fair point, Representative, in that the scope of things we're talking about today are important, and that's why we're here, and that's why we want to have these discussions with you. But, you know, don't lose sight of the fact that this state is still going to spend well over $30 billion this year on very important programs and services for the people of this state.
So thank you, and I'm glad that we agree on the importance of some of these programs, and I appreciate the job that you're trying to do as chairman of the Revenue and Finance Committee, you know, and with you as being involved in the Senate, you know that I've been involved in this for a while, and we welcome the help. However, you guys didn't suspend all state grant programs, right?
Not all, that's correct, sir.
So you suspended some of the state grant programs.
That is correct.
So I would like to have a list, and I'm requesting on behalf of the members of this committee a list of the grant programs that were not suspended. Now, assuming that you suspended some and not suspended others, there had to have been a criteria that was put into place and a group of decision makers which chose to suspend some and not others. Who were the decision makers involved in the process, and was there written criteria for making these decisions?
Well, I think Secretary Bassey alluded to that at his department, but certainly our office played a role, but we relied heavily on the agencies and their experts within those agencies, their program people, their budget people, to identify for us areas that could be suspended. I mean, I'll give you an example, Representative. There were some areas that maybe we would have looked to suspend grants, but it just wasn't an option available because all of the funds had spent out prior to Governor Rauner taking office. So, you know, part of the calculus initially is what's available.
For us to be helpful to you and for us to work with you in these regards, we need to know what's going on, right? So we need to know the criteria that you're using. Do you have a criteria that you're going to use on the next round of grants? Are you going to do additional grant suspensions?
Yeah, that's a good question. There will be additional actions. The actions that we will be taking next will be actions that are mandated by the bills that passed. So as an example, there were Medicaid rate reductions that were passed as part of House Bills 317 and 318. The Department of Health Care and Family Services is currently working on how to implement those rate reductions. Once they have reached the conclusion on how to generate those savings, we will be sharing that with your staff so that you can be advised before those are announced. In addition, the 2.25% reductions in appropriations in some areas, not many, but in some, are going to require us to pare back on some contracts for providers because their appropriations were reduced. So those actions, we have really no discretion in those. Those are mandated to us by the bills that passed, and we will be advising your your staff of those decisions before we move forward.
So, Director, there was no specific criteria with regards to picking the winners or losers or picking the programs that got spared and the ones that didn't, correct?
There was a process and there was a criteria that was broad. You know, the definition of essential was laid out as critical to the health, safety, and public welfare of the people of Illinois. I mean, look, the legislature builds a budget, and so in theory, everything in there is essential to somebody because you included it in the spending plan. And certainly it's essential to those people that get those services, and it's essential to the providers that provide those services.
Well, and that was, I think, the thought contemplated by a lot of members of the legislature, in that making difficult decisions, including fund sweeps, and making difficult decisions to do across-the-board reductions of 2.25%, 2.5%, in order to avoid the absolute elimination of these programs. So we voted for the 2.25%, 2.5%. We voted for the fund sweeps. We get attacked on both those things, and these programs still get eliminated. And so you have, you know, a lot of uncertainty and concern among members of the legislature and members of the general public that we represent, just like you do, that don't understand why, if we made 2.5 across-the-board cuts to give everybody a haircut, but nobody got completely eliminated, did it still happen? And that's a question that we need you to answer.
Okay, and I will attempt to answer that again. And again, I appreciate that position and I understand it. But again, I think I was clear, if not in the specificity, certainly in the intent that we had to continue with the processes that were under place in concert with these bills. I stated it in front of the House Executive Committee. I stated it in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee. I stated it to your staff. I stated it to folks, everybody that I talked to, that those had to continue.
Director, not to cut you off, but with this, we want to get on. So this is what we need. We need a list of the programs you spared. We need a list of the process, or the explanation of the process you went by and who were the decision makers on that, the criteria that were used, and in writing, and the criteria you're going to use for making future grant decisions. Those are formal requests of this committee in my capacity as assisting the majority leader in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And Representative Bradley suggested that we were finished with questions from the committee. We still have to hear from a few people from the autism and epilepsy communities very briefly, but in fact there are more people still asking basic questions, 3 I believe, and remember that we still have another whole agenda on what's happening in the State Board of Education. A reminder again that today the focus is on the Department of Human Services and the Department of Public Health. There will be later hearings that will focus on public safety, other issues, but we do still have a pretty hefty agenda to finish before the morning is out. Representative Brady.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you, gentlemen, both for being here, and I'll be as brief as I can be. Number one, as a father with a son with autism, as a business, and the funeral home business is affected by suspension of grants, I am understanding and dealing with the suspension of those grants. I also understand that this government cannot be everything to all people if we're ever going to put the budget side of things back on the right track and head in the right direction. And I also thank you, Tim and others, for our discussions from the business side to Representative Harris's discussion earlier, and being able to work with you and you inviting me and those in my industry to help you through this, navigate through this difficult time with some options. So thank you for that. My question really centers on the following. Once we in the legislature believed we had filled, by the way of vote, had filled the hole, and we saw the additional suspension of these grants that came out. During negotiations, was there revenue that the governor's office was counting on to help fund the initial hole that was taken off the table that caused a further problem in that roughly $26 million hole?
That's a fair question, Representative. I would say the answer to that is yes. You know, when the legislature negotiates with the executive branch or even amongst itself between chambers, certain things are in and certain things are out. But we in the governor's office had approximately $300 million in other fund reallocations that we were willing to do that certainly would have alleviated the need potentially for the cuts to go as deep as we did. Those were not agreeable, so we were left without those. Additionally, we had other spending reductions that I personally wanted to implement. So for instance, we talked about the 2 1/4 cuts being across the board and affecting everyone. Based on requests from the legislature, those cuts did not impact our transfers to local governments, be it municipalities, be it counties, be it townships, be it the RTA, be it downstate transit. I wanted to apply those reductions to those transfers as well, which, by the way, would have saved well over $50 million, and those were not agreed to. So those areas were held harmless in the bills that were passed, and because those are statutorily required transfers, there is nothing that my office can do to affect that and generate those savings. So the answer to your question is yes, there were other resources that we were willing to tap to try and do this. And I should say, Representative, and I talked to you directly about this, we did not arrive at programs like the autism program at the outset. It was a process of continuing to try and find resources to close a gap in a crisis situation. And as we continued to look to try and close that hole, we ended up with some very, very difficult choices that candidly should have been made last May but weren't. Now we're here and we're making them, and we're here to answer questions about them.
And we're anxious to know exactly the criteria that you used in making those, we agree, very difficult decisions. Are you finished, Representative?
Well, you took a couple minutes of my time later, but okay. I'll be very brief. So when you had to make those decisions that you, if I understand correctly, were not really planning on, because certain things were off the table, not negotiable, that blew a bigger hole into your overall plan, where you did not have certain plans to have to go into maybe even some of the grants you suspended, but by default, you had to look at those grants at that point in time.
That is a fair characterization.
Okay, thank you very much.
And just speaking as a legislator who actually sponsored the bills, I was surprised to discover that what we had done was not adequate to the task we'd been set. So I think it was, as everybody else has suggested, something of a surprise when $26 million cuts were made on Good Friday. We have two more. Representative Duncan. We called you earlier, but you weren't with us.
Yes, I had the chair committee. So thanks for your indulgence, Madam Chair. Most of my questions, fortunately, have been answered, or at least responded to in terms of process. Team Reach, for some reason, just stands out for me. The total budget line item is roughly $13 million. It was a $9+ million reduction. Just trying to get some clarity. I'm getting a major inundation of calls. I ran the Boys and Girls Clubs for 5 years and one of the toughest public housing developments for quite some time. The Chicago Youth Centers, and of course statewide. Just trying to really get to that rationale.
Yeah, and again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it was incredibly difficult to get to the point where we decided which programs would be suspended. And it was this approach of core versus non-core. And at the end, we found that Teen Reach did not fall in that core category of housing, food, and we had other programs focused on youth in crisis that we decided to maintain, like CCBYS, like juvenile rehab.
You have to help me out with these acronyms.
Sorry, excuse me, yes. Comprehensive community-based youth services, whose funding is maintained, and it focuses on specific youth that are in crisis. I agree, the Teen Reach program is an excellent program. It produces great results for the youth that flow through that program. And in a perfect world, we would have been able to continue funding that, but we were left with an incredibly difficult decision. and it fell into that category of non-core. Unfortunately, we're going to have to rely more on what's available to schools. There are some within that receive Teen Reach services that 15 to 25% that can afford after-school programs of another kind, potentially YMCA, things of that sort. I understand it's nowhere going to be near the level of services that were provided before the suspensions and with the option of using Teen Reach. But it was an incredibly difficult decision, and it's not one of those core things of housing, food, and we wanted to make sure we were able to provide services to teens in crisis, which some of our other programs provide.
Sure. And some of the organizations that were impacted, I mean, one could argue sort of essential. Core services are relative to what region you're in. Having an idle mind of millions of teens, and let's say in the urban area, can be near crisis for all citizens there. Final question, did you articulate the detail of the House Bill 317, I believe, where you captured the $300 million and where those dollars went? So we passed a budget that had a $1.3 billion fund sweep authorization. Correct. And there was, with the 2.5% savings or cuts across the board, that generated roughly, with my math, about $300 million. Are we within the same ballpark?
Well, we needed $300 million in savings along with the sweeps of 1.366 to close the gap. See, the issue with the 2.25% across the board reductions is that simply reducing an appropriation line item by 2.25 doesn't necessarily mean you're going to save that money. So I'll give you an example. If there's a line item for $1 million, but the program usually doesn't spend that much, maybe they spend $950,000 and they usually lapse about $50,000, and you reduce that appropriate by 2.25% down to, you know, 9.75 million or whatever the math makes it to be, that doesn't save any money. You're going to be spending below that anyway. So there are all sorts of examples like that where reducing appropriations by 2.25 really doesn't save you any money that you can apply toward filling the $1.6 billion.
Perhaps when we get the written descriptions of the criteria you use to distinguish between essential and non-essential services, you can also identify all of those savings that I think you're quite right, didn't really materialize. But again, I think from a legislative perspective, we didn't know that the 2.25% cut was not going to be adequate when we voted for House Bills 317 and 18.
You take the words right out of my mouth, Madam Chair. Thank you for your indulgence.
Representative Greg Harris wanted some follow-up questions specifically for Secretary Bassey.
And first for Mr. Newting, because you keep saying, and this just struck me, as we talk about the $900 million that was not accounted for, you know, in the list you read out, that all of this is fungible. Why don't we take some of that $900 million then and use it instead of coming back to the legislature and asking us yet for more fund sweeps or more revenue to restore services for people with autism, you know, to bury our dead with dignity, you know, to connect, to keep teens in, you know, our communities safe, especially with summer coming. Why don't we just take that $26 million? If all that money's fungible, why do we have to give you yet more?
It's fungible, but it doesn't multiply upon itself. So if we're balancing the budget, we're reducing spending to get within the resources that we have. Spending was up here, resources were down here. We've got to bring spending down to balance out. Now, if you want to reallocate, then we've got to take money from somewhere else to reallocate to another point. I mean, look, the honest-to-God truth is the legislature passed $100 in promises and $80 in revenue, and we're cutting $20 to try and balance it out, and that's why we're having this hearing today.
But we're still having a hard time figuring out where that $20 went. You know, we know where about $450 went, but there's about $1550, and this goes back to what Representative Bradley said. You know, where did the rest go?
There's
if this was not adequate, then why is it signed into law? Why didn't we do a deal that actually solved the problem?
Taken all together, it will be adequate. And had you not passed these bills, I'd be out there today with my staff and these agencies looking for another $1.4 to $1.5 billion in budget cuts. Or we'd be pushing bills off, or we'd be looking to borrow to fund operations. I will try to the best of my ability to get you a financial rack-up of where we believe we stand today.
So why is it better to just take money from other funds instead of borrowing it and doing the fiscally responsible thing and paying back those money to the funds which they're owed
I
from?
hope to persuade you, Representative, that that is not the fiscally responsible thing. That borrowing for operations is not a good idea. If we borrow from those funds, I mean, those are state funds. We move that money into the general revenue fund, and we are helping to close the hole in FY15. If you borrow those funds, you will get the same effect in FY15, but you're going to have a $650 million bill next year that you're going to have to pay back to those funds when we're trying to fund Medicaid, when we're trying to fund child care, when we're trying to put together a very difficult FY16 budget.
When you borrow from your savings account, it's responsible to put the money back, over time as you earn more money. I don't think that's a problem. But in the Senate, you talked about another $200 million worth of cuts yet coming. Is that...
That was misinterpreted. I think they said we had $100 million more in cuts coming. No, what I said was, I think we needed, outside of what the bills did, I feel like we needed $100 million of savings outside of those actions, and those are happening either in reserves or the grant suspensions that we're talking about today. But there will be other actions coming, which I think I mentioned to Leader Bradley, that we are going to be doing the 2 1/4, which is not going to be a big amount of money, and we're going to be doing the Medicaid reductions, which will be significant, and we will be talking to you about both of those before we do.
So you've got $1.6 billion in what we did already. On top of that, $26 million of shutting down programs, and another 100 and some million. So now we're up to close to $2 billion.
No. What you did was not $1.6 billion. What you did was $1.366 billion from other funds, and maybe $100 million in savings. What we're doing on our own is trying to close the gap with the rest, and that's why we've needed to continue to do what we're doing to try and close that gap. And again, I know there was a misunderstanding there. I don't know how to do it any other way other than to tell you in committee and to tell your staff that these activities will continue, short of being invited to your caucus, which I know doesn't happen. So I communicated through the appropriate channels to the best of my ability.
So for folks back home, who may be listening, and to their bankers and the people who are extending them lines of credit, when are they going to know whether, whether the state is going to make good on its obligations to them, or if the state is going to say, we're not paying you or the value of your contracts? I mean, this is coming up with banks back home. When do they stop lending based on uncertainty about how the state is going to perform its contractual obligations?
I think if grants have been suspended, folks need to operate under the assumption that those are going to be suspended through the end of the fiscal year. And I would say to you, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, we don't want to be in this position. This is what happens when you have crisis governing. I want to pass a balanced budget and not have to revisit the budget in the middle of the year. Revisiting the budget in the middle of the year because the budget's unbalanced and you have to make cuts to balance it out causes stress, causes grief, causes consternation for you, certainly for the people that provide those services, for the people that have to implement these reductions to make the budget balanced. Let's don't do any more crisis governing. Let's do a balanced budget, and so people have stability and predictability to where they know what they're getting, and they know they're going to have it all year long, and they can manage accordingly. So
the other Representative Harris, who's wise beyond belief, as all Harrises are, mentioned, when are we going to know? I think a lot of this hinges on April receipting, that we know that there's a possibility because of the effect of timing issues. When are we going to know what our April receipts are?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. Certainly, I would think within a few days after April comes in. I would think within a few days after April comes in.
But do you think it would be
Let's say it's May 5th, maybe.
Do you plan to make your decisions going forward to do your other 126 million in cuts before you know what our revenue number is, or are you going to do that before April, the end of April?
Well, we have a revenue estimate on file. It's very close to what COGFA's revenue estimate is. I do not want to make changes or assumptions based on, you know, what might come in. We are proceeding to try and balance the budget with the information that we have at our disposal today. You know, if there are positive revenues down the line, we'll have to take a look at that. But I would caution the committee and members that it's very easy when you're making difficult decisions to try and just fudge the revenue number a little bit to make it all seem okay. It's a very dangerous game to get into.
Yeah, but in other years, you know, we haven't fudged the number, and I really object to, you know, you saying that we did on revenue numbers. You know, I think we're very responsible through the work Representative Bradley did and Representative Harris did on setting, you know, adequate revenues. Sometimes it underperformed. The last couple of years it has overperformed, largely because of, you know, changes in federal capital gains tax. And in April and after April, we made supplemental appropriations to pay some of these bills. So I think it's actually prudent to see where the April revenues come in. You know, we think that, you know, because of the net operating loss carry forward changes that were made a couple years ago, we may see more come in this April. Wouldn't it be better to wait to see what the actual numbers are than put our people back home through a lot of chaos and a lot of consternation, laying off workers, you know, closing down businesses, and then finding out, well, more revenue may have come in, we didn't have to do this after all?
Well, here, your point is very well made. Here's the risk in that. If we wait until the end of April, middle of May, to make the further reductions that need to happen, and those revenues don't come in, then those reductions are even harder and a shorter time period for those folks to deal with.
The end of April is 9 days.
Well, that's, I mean, how much time do we have left in the fiscal year?
Okay, thank you.
Are you finished, Representative? Yeah, okay, Representative Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sir, would you agree that in balancing a budget, sometimes it's not just about making cuts, it may be a need for additional revenue?
I think balancing a budget is certainly, it's simply making revenues and expenditures match. That's correct.
Well, you didn't answer my question. So when you say revenues and expenditures match based on maybe tax receipts and things of that nature, I understand. But isn't it possible that in order to achieve what you're seeking that you may need to actually get new revenue?
Sir, I am operating under the environment that I am living in right now.
Can you just answer my question?
Yes, yeah, I have to make cuts to balance this budget because of the revenue situation, the revenue environment that exists, and we are making those reductions.
So is that a yes or a no?
I don't understand your question then. I
thought it was pretty clear. Sometimes in order to make things work the way they're supposed to, isn't there a need to get new revenue, to have new revenue?
Representative, when the
you understand what I mean by new revenue, right?
You can balance a budget with revenue or spending reductions if it's out of balance. You are correct.
So new revenue, you understand what I mean by new revenue, right? Revenue, monies that you didn't have,
yeah,
that you may have to make policy changes in order to achieve.
Yeah,
right?
and I would characterize the fund reallocations as possible new revenue, certainly to the GRF.
Well, you said it's possible new revenue, so is it new revenue to you or not?
Is the fund reallocations?
Yeah, you just said
it's new revenue to the GRF from revenue that's in existing funds.
But it's existing revenue.
I don't know what you want me to say, Representative.
I think he wants you to say whether you're for or against new revenue sources. I think that's what he's asking. And you may answer it or not, but
that's one way
that's
of saying
the question.
it. I mean, you can choose not to answer, but I'm asking you, is it possible to achieve what you're trying to do by obtaining new revenue?
Yes, as I mentioned, new revenue or spending reductions will help balance a budget.
Okay, I mean, we get that you guys want to cut spending. I'm clear on that, but sometimes there might be a need for new revenue. I'm just wondering, does that come to figure into your equation at all?
Well, we have not proposed new revenue, no, sir.
Not proposed it yet?
No.
Okay.
Representative David Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just to track on what my previous, my colleague just said, but to come to your defense, if I'm not mistaken, by statute, you have to introduce a budget which is based on current law, meaning based on what the tax revenue is today, not on what may be possibly changed in the future. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, except that the budget proposed included, I believe, $2.2 billion in savings from a pension program that has not, as far as I know, even been introduced in the legislature, let alone passed and signed into law. I don't know if you want to address that, Mr. Nuding?
I will. You know, the governor's budget is a proposal, just like past governors. It's a proposal. There are all sorts of plans in that budget that would require statutory changes or actions by the legislature. If we were forced to provide a budget under current law that adhered to existing revenues and existing statute on spending, we would almost by definition have to present to you an unbalanced budget, which would be
unconstitutional. And maybe you have. Representative Crespo.
Thank you, Leader Curry. Director Newton, I just need to follow up on one of your responses. Again, I'm trying to reconcile these numbers. So one of the things, the sweeps under House Bill 317, we were under the impression that that resulted in $1.3 billion. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, 1.36 was the number that was in the bill.
Now, I heard you, now the 2.25% cuts, our understanding was that that translated into $300 million. But what I heard you say today is that that's not necessarily the case.
No, that is not necessarily the case.
So how much did the 2.25% cut, what did that come up to?
I think coupled with the Medicaid reductions, which were...
I'm just looking at House Bill 317. Which,
just in the appropriation?
Right. Again, we were under the impression that 2.25% cut across the board resulted in $300 million, but you just gave us the example of the 80-20%. So that I'm trying to reconcile, what did the 2.25% amount to?
So we're going to get you those numbers. I think it's in the range of maybe $100 million. Maybe. Just the 2.25% reductions. Then, of course, we took other actions on our own prior to that.
No, I understand, but I'm just looking specifically at the bill that we voted on, right? And so what I'm hearing today is that, and there's a huge difference between $300 million and $100 million.
Well, I think that where we're talking past each other is you are probably dealing with appropriation reductions, and I'm talking about what's actually saved by those appropriation reductions.
So it brings me to another point.
Yeah.
Because I've heard you say several times today that people were being misinterpreted, misunderstood. I've heard that on several occasions in the last hour and a half. And again, we go back to this trust and credibility as we move forward. And I would ask you, please, if you feel, wait a second, I don't think that the other side understood what I meant. I don't think they understood how the numbers added up. We would like to know, because that's a difficult time. That's what I'm having a difficult time with. And in case in point, it's a 2.25. I think it was, we saw that in the press. We saw that in memos. That 2.25% cut across the board equated to $300 million. But you're telling us today, no, there's some other factors that you have taken into account. It really does not. Again, you're going to give us some information. I guess we can drill down and try to figure that out ourselves. And you've mentioned a couple of times this crisis. I'm not going to argue that. There is a crisis. But what I feel is that we're creating a bigger crisis. That is not helpful. And I've been here 8 years, and it's being a suburban, very fiscally conservative legislator. I learned very quickly that working on the budget is not only a math equation. We cannot ignore the social responsibility. And we need to balance that. And I just, again, as of today, April 21st, I just feel that we're ignoring that social responsibility. It's not as easy as running the business. And I'm telling you, as a former manager in the private sector, it's just, they're two different animals, running government and running the business. The other thing, my last point, Leader Curry, I also agree that running a supplemental every year is not a good way to do business. Sometimes things do come up and we're going to have to do it, but since I've been here, it seems like it's become an MO. We always have to run a supplemental, and we see things that we did not expect, or we see things that we anticipated. We kind of figured that was going to happen. During one of my appropriation hearings, we had the director of CMS, and forgive me, I forgot his name. I think he was very well qualified, very impressed by the director. And under CMS, there's an assumption of saving, I forgot what the amount was, for healthcare insurance.
Yeah.
Do you know what that number is?
I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 million.
$700 million. So under the assumptions of CMS, they introduced a budget where they are already factoring in a saving of $700 million. And I asked the director, well, please help me understand, what happens if you don't achieve the $700 million that you think you will? Because we don't know.
Can you answer that briefly, Mr. Nuding?
I can, yes. We will work with the legislature to try and actually we'll negotiate with the union as it stands to try and achieve those savings. That's a proposal. If we are not able to achieve that level of savings, I will not be advocating for cutting those appropriations by that much when we reach a final budget. If we're able to achieve more savings than that, I will be advocating for reducing appropriations more than that. But it is what it is. It's a proposal. I would not advocate for cutting more than we save as we negotiate with the union.
So the point I was trying to get to, going back to the supplemental process that we have. Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say is, depends on what you get. And there's an issue of timing here because we need to finish our budget by May. I don't think you're going to know how much you're going to save by the end of May. So, but I'm just going back to the hearing that I had with CMS and other agencies. So again, I was trying to understand, if you don't achieve those savings by the end of May, by which time I have to introduce the budget, what happens next? And I'll tell you what the response was. Fine, we'll come back next year for a supplemental.
Well,
no difference from the MO, which raises the question of the $2.2 billion in savings that Leader Kirby brought up. Is that the intent, that if you don't achieve those savings during this budget process, you're going to come back next May for a supplemental bill before this General Assembly?
Well, you want to make sure the resources are there first before you ever ask for a supplemental. My intent is to negotiate with you and others a balanced budget based on the best information we have available at the end of May.
But you understand.
Representative,
and you mentioned the timing issue, right?
Yes.
You have to do this by the end of May.
Yes.
Are you going to achieve $2.2 billion in savings and pensions and $700 million in insurance by the end of May?
If we don't pass pension reform, we're not going to see any savings. So,
but again, I'm going back to your point, Director Nuding. We have until the end of May. You brought up the issue of timing.
Yep.
So please help me understand, how is that going to happen between now, April 21st, and the end of May? We're going to pass a pension reform bill for savings of $2.2 billion, health insurance savings of $700 million. And I need to know, because I have to work on this budget. How are we going to, and we're taking credit for that for fiscal year 16. So help me understand how we're going to do that in the next
I think that maybe we'll get some answers, Representative, when he gives us in writing all the criteria they have used, the principles that govern the decisions they so far have made. We have had waiting in the audience families with autistic children who are ready to speak with us, and I apologize to them that they have had such a long wait. But if you would come forward at this point, Director Nuding and Secretary Bassey, if you would wait in case there are additional questions from the members of the panel, that would be helpful.
Of course.
So we have, I believe, Shannon Laney, Elaine Lewis, Emily Chetty, Sarah Miller, Russ Bonanno. And if you would come forward and all of you sit at the table together, if you can each keep your actual remarks very, very brief, that would be helpful, but we know you've traveled a long way, and we are anxious to hear what you have to say. And as you speak, perhaps you would just tell us who you are, but if each of you could take less than, a minute and a half, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Madam Chair, member of the committee, my name is Russ Bonanno. I'm the director of the Autism Program of Illinois, and I'm going to ask the families to speak for us today.
My name is Brandy Gertman.
And my name is Kira.
Okay, your name is Kira, Princess. The TAPS program is so vitally important to our family. I've heard all morning about dollars and cents and budget. I will tell you right now our physical budget. Kira gets a medical card because my husband's insurance for her to be covered is so astronomical. In fact, it's $833 a month, and that's not counting copay. I've heard budget about education. I learned last week when they told us that the Autism Center at SIU got their pink slips. My daughter lost her classroom due to educational cutbacks. My daughter has no classroom next year. I realize that there is a budget that has to be met, but you cannot make this budget on the backs of children. It's unethical. It's not right. I realize that there is a crisis here. I live in a crisis on a daily basis that never ends. And if you stop therapy and you stop help for these kids, there's no hope for these kids, and I will live in a crisis until I have passed away, and probably an indigent burial, because everything I have will go to make sure that my daughter is secure. Her brothers will take care of her for the rest of her life if something is not done to help these kids. I want her to be a productive member of society. I don't want her to be the state's responsibility. I don't want that. None of the parents that we talk to want that. But you cannot do what y'all are doing. I realize there's a budget. Cut the road budget. Cut your own salaries. Cut your own pensions. I have a relative in the prison system. As far as I'm concerned, they can eat bread and drink water. Cut their stuff. These children did not ask for what is happening to them. And they are depending on you as educated adults to help them. The amount of money that is allocated for autism is a drop in the bucket. You would need a microscope to see it in your budget. You cannot stop helping these kids.
Thank you very much. That's very moving testimony.
Hi, I'm Elaine Lewis, and my son, who's 11 years old, doesn't display classic autism. 7 years ago, he was hitting his developmental milestones. We moved here from Arizona. We thought everything was on board with us. We started him in preschool. We had early intervention testing done. Nothing surfaced at that time, but we knew there was something wrong. We had observed issues with him. We went on to kindergarten then because we didn't qualify for early intervention services. First day of kindergarten, I get a call. He's underneath the table. Meltdowns every day for his first week in school. The school was unable to help us. We went through 2.5 years trying to work with the school and trying to get a diagnosis. No support was there, no expertise was there. Then we heard about TAP, and we went there, and it was like a life preserver being thrown at us. Finally, somebody understood. So the therapy services that we received there, we finally made some traction. And I have a son who's gifted, who tests very high academically, but socially, emotionally, he needs that support. We go to social skills groups. And believe me, my husband's a physician in this community. We looked everywhere for resources. There were none except TAP. If you take this away from us, we have no resources. My son is progressing. He has made major strides. He's going to be a productive citizen, I know it, in Illinois, and I want him to continue to be able to do that. Without TAP, we're really worried because the resources are scattered. They're very organized. They provide clinical services to us. They provide education to us. They provide support to us. So again, and I sit in the waiting room, I talk to a lot of other families who are also under the same challenges. Take this away from us, and I feel my son will regress, not progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Chetty. I'm a high school science teacher, and my 3-year-old was diagnosed 7 months ago with autism. He was normal up until 18 months, and then he regressed. He is now, actually has about the same language skills as my 10-month-old. He has gone through early intervention, and we saw minimal changes with early intervention at the time. He then started the public school system at 3 years old to continue speech and develop occupational therapies. And when he did that, we started to see some changes. His social skills started to get better. Not that I can prove it because he doesn't demonstrate it, but I think my son is very intelligent. But the social skills and being able to respond in kind are not there. In January, my son started ABA preschool therapy in tandem with his public education. During that time, from the special education assessments, I have watched his scores, and I do actually have the numbers, jump. He has gone from no ability to answer a question to answering a question with 66% just with the addition of TAP. I have real numbers showing me real concrete evidence that this program is helping my son. And I will echo what they said. They said that without this program, our children will not become productive members of society. This is a very penny-wise, dollar-foolish item to cut. Because by cutting this program, when you're helping children in their most formative years get caught up to be ready to perform in our school systems and then later in society, that's the better way to go than making them dependent on society for the rest of their lives. I'm a high school teacher. I do not make enough money to pay for somebody to drive my child to Peoria daily to get the Easter seals. 70 miles one way to get this program. There is nothing like that here in Springfield. This is the only one. One of you guys suggested that the programs are regional. What's important is regional. That is very true. In Springfield, this is the only program. And I find that very important. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Sarah Miller. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3, and my youngest son has autism. He was diagnosed right after he turned 2, but he was, I believe, born with it. He has had issues since birth. And whenever you find that out as a parent, you fight for your child, and I believe that you know that. You will assemble a dream team. If you can, you will move heaven and earth so that you can provide the best for your children. My son was enrolled in the ABA preschool program that TAP provides this January. He used to be nonverbal, which is a very common thing in autism. He was not speaking. He speaks in complete sentences now. He can identify shapes. He is gaining momentum. I homeschool my children, and I take the time to send him to TAP because he's going to get those fundamentals that are going to help teach him later. It goes back to being proactive and reactive. A woman had mentioned that earlier, you know, what are you taking away now that is going to affect us later? And she said it, and we all believe it. We know that this is vital for our children. It's helping them to gain skills that are going to lead them later in life. You have to get the foundation built, and it takes a lot of work with children with autism to get that foundation. If you take it away, you lose it. It doesn't stay. They regress. I've seen it in my own son. We've done public school before. It didn't work. We have done a lot. If I could only have one service for my son, I would choose TAP again and again and again. And I feel like all the parents that I have met that are in this TAP program with us echo that. I know that decisions are going to be made and the budget has to be cut. I'm not crazy to think that a money tree exists, but we are asking you to consider this being a vital program, and please, please don't take it away. And thank you for your time.
Thank you all very much for traveling here and sharing the faces behind the dollars and cents. Does anybody on the panel have a question, on our panel have a question for anybody on this panel? Representative Belloc.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your testimony. We know how important, and I know, are all of you from Southern Illinois University where the TAP program was there, or are you from different TAP programs?
We're 3 from the one here in Springfield.
Okay. Oh, okay. And you are from?
I'm from Southern Illinois, yeah.
Okay.
And if TAP stops, the program stops. There is nothing else. I called Cape Girardeau. They said, I feel your pain, but we have too many kids here. We don't help Illinois kids. I've been on a 3-year waiting list for 5 years at Cardinal Glennon and Children's Hospital. If this stops, there's nothing. And due to the educational budget cutbacks and my daughter's REACH classroom at Tri-County stopping, the TAP program would come into the school and train everyone that had contact with my daughter. That's not going to be there now. My daughter is going to be floating in the wind with her little autism bracelet that says I have speech and language communication problems.
And are you able to access early intervention through your school district?
No.
Oh, there isn't an early interventions program?
Early intervention.
She's aged out.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
She is entitled to 30 minutes of speech therapy once a week. That's nothing. That will do nothing to help her.
All right. Thank you very much.
Representative Crespo.
Thank you, Leader Curry. You know, you've been here for quite a while, and we appreciate you being patient with us. And you heard us talk about trying to figure out what's essential and non-essential. And as I listen to testimony from all of you, I hear, number one, there's a huge need for autism in the state, correct? I think we all agree. And number two, very little options available. Is that what I hear today too? And to me, I would imagine that that really is the litmus test for what's essential and non-essential. So I need to apologize to you because some of us supported the supplemental bill that is passed in May, and we were under the impression that mental health and disability services were going to be taken care of. So this is a big surprise to us as well. I feel your pain. I live in the northwest suburbs, and although we do have a lot of resources when it comes to autism, we have the same issues. There's a great need, but the options are very, very little. So in my definition of essential, I would think that this is essential. But thank you for your patience and for joining us today. Thank you, Leader Curry.
I think we'll hold questions for Director Nuding and Secretary Bassey until we've heard from the next panel, which represents people who have suffered from epilepsy. Do you want to ask the panel? A question from Representative Brady, and if the people who are here, I believe Kurt, Florian, Mary Kay, Royce, Kathy Elton, and Alex Houston, if they would be prepared to come forward. I'm sorry, Representative Brady has a question for the autism panel.
More so, it's just a comment. First off, ladies and gentlemen, and to the children, thank you for being here. You heard me testify. My son is autistic. Yes, he has Asperger's. He's been recipient of services from TAP over the years. TAP has received state funds for almost, I believe, in excess of 10 years in the programs. We know how difficult this is. I share what you're going through and will be an advocate to the best of my ability. And the reality is, what we have to do is prioritize those services, and it's a priority for me, but there's not anyone you can't find in the General Assembly that has a priority that takes funds to try and provide services. And so I pledge to you to work with the administration. The administration has said they will work with us to continue to discuss things. And you heard from being in the committee today the challenges we have ahead of us. And I can simply say that your testimony is not falling upon deaf ears, whether it's this committee or whether it's those that are sitting behind you that testified earlier. So my heart goes out to you, and keep up doing everything you can for your kids like I do for my son, independent of relying on somebody else if that's what we have to do for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you again, members of the panel. And now if the next panel could come forward, please. Just tell us your name and then give us your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Kurt Florian. I'm the president and CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago. Thank you, Leader Curry and members of the House Budget Oversight panel. On Good Friday, the Epilepsy Foundation and other epilepsy organizations throughout the state received notice from Acting Secretary Bassey of the suspension of 100% of the funding for epilepsy programs and services, meaning that about over $514,000 in funding for epilepsy programs and services was going to be cut for the rest of fiscal year 2015, which represents about a cost of $2.50 per person in Illinois that suffers from epilepsy. We've also been advised that under the proposed budget for 2016, $2 million, which represents about $10 of spending for people in Illinois with epilepsy, will be cut to zero. In Illinois, over 200,000 people currently suffer from epilepsy, and 1 in 26 people, or about 400,000 people in Illinois, will develop epilepsy at some point in their lifetime. Of these people, 1/3 are uncontrolled, have uncontrolled epilepsy because there are no medications or other solutions to control their seizures. The DHS notice surprised me, confused me, disappointed me. Based on the resolution reached on March 26th, while we were here celebrating Illinois Epilepsy Advocacy Day, we thought that our funding was going to be cut 2.25%, not 100%. DHS funding represents about 50% of the funds that the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago receives, and closer to 100% of the funding for other organizations in the state. With that funding, we were able to provide programs and services to people in Illinois with epilepsy on over 30,000 occasions in 2014, including over 7,000 instances of counseling, case management, advocacy, and referral services to our clients, 80% of which live below the federal poverty line. The Epilepsy Foundation and other organizations in Illinois that provide services understand that Illinois is in dire financial shape and that adjustments need to be made in order to rectify that situation. 100% slashing of the funds that help people in Illinois that suffer from epilepsy is not a compassionate budget. The Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago is a public-private partnership that helps people with epilepsy and can help to solve the problem that Illinois is currently facing. By eliminating this funding, the Epilepsy Foundation will be forced to discontinue or drastically reduce our programs and services, and this will have devastating consequences on those vulnerable people living in Illinois with epilepsy who will be left with no other support service and cause increasing health problems, ultimately resulting in increased health care costs for the state of Illinois. As the father of a daughter with epilepsy, I beg of you to reinstate the funding for 2015 and allow the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago to continue to provide these wonderful programs and services for the 200,000 people in Illinois that suffer from epilepsy. And there are 3 people who have received services from the Epilepsy Foundation who would now like to share their story.
Okay, here we go. I'm Kathy Elwood, and I have adult onset epilepsy, which is very different from epilepsy in children. It has its own share of problems. I'm self-employed, or I was self-employed, until I was diagnosed with epilepsy, and some of the things are loss of concentration, short-term memory loss, depression, anxiety, and a host of other things. I spent $14,000 last year in medication, and I would not like to spend that kind of money again. I don't have a savings account. I loved my job, I loved it dearly, but I can no longer do it. So I'm looking for a job. I'm looking for a job as a patient transporter in the hospitals, which I had to swallow my ego. I have a master's degree and move patients around in hospital for $10 an hour. The Epilepsy Foundation has helped me dearly. For one thing, I won't be spending $14,000. We had a retreat with other people with epilepsy, and it's interesting for us to share our stories. We get support, things of that nature. For this funding to go away would be detrimental to me, and I think to our state budget, because I don't want to work at $10 an hour. I'd like to maintain my income. That won't be, but again, if we would reconsider the cuts, I would be very, very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. I'm Alex Houston, and I'm 18 years old, and I'm a senior at Wheaton North High School, so it was a bit of a drive this morning. But I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to share on my behalf, as well as, most importantly, for those who speak from their heart but aren't most likely here due to their lack of verbalization, their difficulties, and their challenges that they deal with while living with epilepsy every day. I am 18 years old, and I have epilepsy, and I was diagnosed in 5th grade. And the need for funding and the support and everything being cut and eliminated is clearly that it would make a difference in a life of many others, including myself. I am fortunate and I am thankful that I was only born with a brain injury called porencephaly, which is a rare nervous system disorder causing part of my brain to not function as well, which led to my seizures. And like I said, I am fortunate. I'm here now, sitting, talking in front of all of you, and most of you could say, I look normal, I sound normal, but that's the biggest thing about the disabilities that most people have now is it is hidden. You don't see it, you don't notice it until we tell you that you have it. And it's just hard to understand that taking these medications and trying to get these accommodations while you walk, look, and talk as though you're normal and everyone around you thinks that you're normal, it's extremely difficult because you are normal until you realize that doing all these things that you want to do in your daily life are holding you back because of your disabilities. And surprisingly enough, my struggles, my weaknesses have now become my strengths, and for the reason that I'm here now. And these strengths are not visible because 5 years ago, I was afraid to go to school. I had personal fears of sharing my epilepsy and my other disabilities, and I thought it would be better that no one knew. And I kept it that way for a long time until I realized that one day I had a seizure at school, and guess what? I was terrified because I saw all those people I heard all those people looking at me, staring and talking about me, but I could not see them. Because when I have a seizure, I go blind and I see things that aren't there. So it was frightening to me and frightening to those who were around me. So my disabilities don't challenge just me. They challenge who I affect and who I live with every single day. And I do not change on my own. I change because of the support and the help that I get from my friends, my family, the Epilepsy Foundation, and without them, I would still be in that struggle today, looking upon you guys and being terrified right now. And with the opportunities that the Epilepsy Foundation has given me, I'm able to overcome my challenges. They have given me support groups. They have given education and tips and information that has brought me into a camp that I can only describe in 2 words as life-changing. The camp that they created was Camp Blackhawk. To most people, a camp is a camp, but for me, the camp was a life-changing experience to see that I can overcome these challenges. I can overcome my disabilities, and I can live a normal life, become a part of this future that all of you are a part of now, and I am your future. I'm 18 years old, and before you know it, I'm going to be here doing everything that you guys are, supporting the government, supporting the state, and thanks to the camps and the foundation, I'm able to make a difference for those who aren't here, for those who aren't able to advocate because they are far worse than I am. And every year I find and I meet new people with different disabilities, different weaknesses, but they all need the support from the foundation to find their strengths, to overcome their small challenges, no matter how big or small they may be, We all have a challenge. And another thing that the foundation does is they assist every person with every disability, because we have a wide variety. And they have supported me with another Peer Alliance group, which is when you are older, when you're over 18 years old, you learn how to get ready for the real world so we can help and understand how to move in the real world in the future, because just the education that we get as kids, we can't succeed in the future without the support of the Epilepsy Foundation. They have created writing programs, art therapy programs that helps us focus on what we need to focus on, so that when we become a full-grown adult, we know how to succeed in life. And we don't have to follow and support ourselves with only the funding that has been given. We are able to support ourselves. And to take away these opportunities, my life, your life, and people with and without epilepsy will be affected. Because like what is said in the statistics, 1 in 26 people will have epilepsy. But the biggest statistic is the fact that every single person, everyone, has a chance of having a seizure in their entire life. And the fact that it's so hidden and it's a very rare disability, it's hard and it's eye-opening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the House Budget Committee. My name's Mary Kay Wrench, and we have 2 children with epilepsy. Michael, who is 8 years old, and Grant, who is 5 years old. Michael began having seizures at 3 months of age, and thus began our journey with epilepsy. Michael had uncontrollable seizures for 3 years, culminating in neurosurgery at Rush University Medical Center when he was 3 years old. The surgery successfully removed a brain tumor, which was the source of Michael's seizures. In addition, our son Grant began having seizures at 3 years of age, and his seizures are currently controlled with medication. Our relationship with the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago began 8 years ago during our 2-week stay at Hope Children's Hospital when Michael was an infant. Prior to Michael experiencing seizures, we had never witnessed epilepsy firsthand. The staff of the foundation put us in contact with other parents of epileptic children. Over the years, the foundation has been a tremendous support to our family. Having one child with epilepsy is quite difficult, but with the onset of Grant's seizures, that was an incredible blow to our family. The foundation has provided advocacy at our son's IEP meetings to assist us in navigating services in the public school system. They have offered a Seizure Smart program at school to inform the school staff of seizures. We have attended numerous informative seminars presented by the foundation, including the annual consumer conference, Epilepsy and Diet, and the art therapy program. The foundation has many family events which have been integral for our 2 other children in their understanding and living with epileptic siblings. Finally, Michael has attended Camp Blackhawk for 2 summers, and it has been a true highlight in his life. We hope to send our son Grant to Camp Blackhawk this summer as well. A substantial cut in state funding to the foundation would be a detriment to my family and hundreds of other families impacted by epilepsy. Our sons are under the care of Dr. Michael Smith at St. Alexis Medical Center. The clinic at St. Alexis is crucial to the health and well-being of our sons. Dr. Smith is an expert in neurology, and our family is indebted to him for the care of our sons. Eliminating funding to the foundation would directly impact the care Dr. Smith provides to our sons. We realize that the state of Illinois budget cuts need significant reductions, and the foundation is willing to assist in such cuts. But please reconsider the impact of such cuts to the Epilepsy Foundation and the families they serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for this panel? Representative David Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Very briefly, and perhaps for the executive director or for anyone, what sorts of services, this $514,000 reduction, what sorts of services are provided by the foundation to help the families? Is it payment for medical treatments, or I've heard something referenced here, Camp Blackhawk? What sorts of services are provided by the Epilepsy Foundation?
In general, we provide counseling, advocacy, and education services. That includes case management. We have 5 case managers on staff who assist our clients with obtaining Social Security benefits, finding transportation, finding employment, maintaining employment, also with education programs like IEPs, 504 plans, as well as general awareness within the community of of epilepsy and the way to react to somebody having a seizure.
So it's not any medications that they might need, that's not...
Well, we also have, in conjunction with St. Alexis Hospital, a free epilepsy clinic where we saw over 700 patient visits last year. We also assist through our case managers in obtaining needed medications, either through programs that some of the pharmaceutical companies offer or through other programs that allow people to obtain their medications and remain controlled and seizure-free.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Representative Greg Harris.
So, Alex, it's good to see you again. And, you know, one of the more moving days I had down here was when you and your family came down, a couple weeks ago, and you told me your story. I mean, this is really sort of, ladies and gentlemen, this is what courage looks like. I mean, it's pretty amazing that 5 years ago, you weren't even going to school, and now you're down here traveling hundreds of miles, speaking on behalf of, people who are, struggling and can't speak for themselves. And you look at this, like a couple $100,000 within a, $60 billion budget. How can we say, these are non-essential programs? And this goes to you ladies, it goes to the moms from the autism program before. How can we say that little bit of support that has changed your life and is allowing you to help other young men and women change theirs is not essential? We really got to go back and relook at this. So, thank you very much for coming down again and sharing.
Representative Belloc.
Thank you very much. I just had one question on the issue. So you don't provide drugs itself. You work with the St. Alexis Hospital, is that correct? Or do you provide pharmaceuticals, the foundation itself?
We do not provide the drugs ourselves. We work with some of the the low-income programs that the drug companies have. We work with St. Alexis also. We have a partnership with the doctors from Rush to go to St. Alexis to see the patients.
Okay.
So correct, we don't provide the medication ourselves, but we assist people in getting the medications that they need.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for your testimony. It was very compelling, and especially Alex. You did a great job. You can go back. One of these days you might be sitting on this side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members of the panel. We do appreciate your testimony. We appreciate you've taken time and trouble to get here, and your stories are certainly compelling. And if we could now ask Director Nuding and Secretary Bassey to return to the table, I think perhaps they can answer Representative Greg Harris's $64 million question. That would be on the criteria that you use to define essential and non-essential services. I know Representative Arroyo has a question. Maybe you want to answer Representative Greg Harris's first, but perhaps Representative Arroyo has a question as well. And just a reminder to our panel that we are intending to talk to the State Board of Education very shortly.
I'm sorry, so was Representative Harris's the question specifically how
explain to me and explain to the people who just testified how the services that help those families with autism and those with epilepsy, could even be possibly considered to be non-essential services when you hear how it's changed their lives.
Again, I go back to the fact that these were incredibly difficult decisions, and some very good programs have been suspended as a result of those April 3rd letters that went out. The approach that we took was to look at programs that were core to the mission of DHS and that were non-core. And some of these specific grants, like the two that we're discussing now, one is to the specific provider, the autism program. That specific line item to that specific provider was suspended, and then we had another set of grants to specific providers related to epilepsy, and those specific grants were for awareness and education for epilepsy. And each of those, much of what they did was education and awareness. I understand that the autism program, at least the grant specific to them, did provide some hard services. In looking at our entire budget and making decisions based on priorities, our Division of Developmental Disabilities serves a whole range of individuals with intellectual disabilities, including cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism spectrum disorder, and other related conditions. And we have about 22,000 individuals within the state that are in the 3 Medicaid waiver programs that the state provides, and each of them receive services for their related conditions. We have 18 independent service coordinators statewide that provide referrals, screenings, assessments, many of the same things that were referenced by the autism program, and try to find places for those individuals. I understand that the suspension of these programs is going to mean less services for those people. There's less avenues for them to access. I can pledge to you that our program people will work their tails off to find ways, whatever way possible, with the limited resources we have, to point those people in the direction of the services that the state does have.
You know, a couple years ago, with the best of intentions, you know, people in this room and, you know, a different administration decided, well, we can cut adult dental and we can, you know, put limits on prescription medication, and this is going to save all kinds of money, and it's a good decision. And you know what, we at the time we said it seemed like the right thing to do. You know, sometimes you make decisions that are not right, and then you see the evidence come back and you see the effects it has on real people's lives, and you got to say that wasn't right. And we came back and we corrected that. Is there just any possibility that, you know, hearing what we've heard from these families and the folks with epilepsy and the folks without, that maybe we're not being right again?
All I can say is how difficult this has been. I agree with you that this, you know, making these kinds of decisions is something that nobody wants to be doing. As the acting secretary of this agency, I have to make decisions based on the resources that are available. And in the current environment we're in, I had to make incredibly difficult decisions with the help of my program people that put their sweat and their tears into this work daily. And for them, this was very difficult. And so I understand from your point of view why you're saying that this is wrong. From my point of view, I have to make decisions based on the resources that are available, and some of them are just difficult decisions where no one is going to be happy.
Thank you.
Representative Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These are very important programs to our community. These are very important situations that people are in. I heard earlier that you were considering suspending this for now. How about 216? Is it a different, is it suspended now, suspended at 216? Or 216, the budget is coming up, is that some of these programs are going to be in there or none of them are going to be in there?
Under the current proposed budget, each of the programs that has been suspended as of now, as of the April 3rd letters, are also discontinued in 2016.
So I also heard earlier that you are going to fund fracking, but you're not going to fund epilepsy. You're going to fund fracking, but you're not going to fund autism. Does that sound right to you? Is fracking that important? Is it an essential thing that we have to do, go somewhere and dig a hole and look for oil and look for something other than support these people that are in dire needs? I have a lot of these people in my district, and our job is to protect these people, the vulnerable people, right? Now, our job is to pass a budget. How do you think these members in this committee are going to vote to pass your budget with these programs not in it? Do you have a plan B for your budget, or this is do or die budget do you have? Because I tell you one thing, if these programs are not put back into this budget, you might have to go back and redraft another budget because it's not going to work for me. You're cutting essential programs that mean a lot to our minority population, our minority community in our district, I don't see how I could vote for this. Now, I voted for the supplemental bill, and there was a lot of things in there that you can't answer for that you were supposed to pay for and you were supposed to get done. And you can answer to a lot of the things, that 900 million that are not still been answered to. So there's a lot of not answered questions with your supplemental. The supplemental was kind of tough too, and we voted for it to be able to work with the administration. But it don't look like you guys are looking to work with us. And these, again, these are essential programs that we want to keep in this budget. So maybe you should go back to the drawing board and probably kind of retool those essential programs back into this budget so we could vote on it and get out of here early. If not, we might be here a long time, because I don't see a lot of these members being able to vote for this budget with these cuts. And these cuts are, we understand that we have to cut. I'm one of them that I have a budget that I'm not going to be able to cut all of the cuts that are asking for in this FY16 budget. I'm going to try my best. But you guys are cutting to the bone. We all understand you have to cut, but we don't have to cut this deep into the bone of this budget. Budget's usually gradually done. You go up and you cut a little bit at a time. You go to the next year you cut a little bit more, and you cut a little bit more until you get to what you want to do. It seems like you guys want to cut this all in the first year. That's tough. That's tough. Same way it's tough for you, it's going to be tough for us to vote for it. I think we all want to get out of here on May 31st. But if you keep this budget the way it is, with all these our essential programs, I don't see us going anywhere anytime soon, let alone voting for it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Brady.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to circle back on a point I'm trying to get clear in my mind. These areas that had suspension in grants, at the time you looked at them, they showed you funds that had not been spent for the fourth quarter of the FY15 budget. Is that correct?
Yes. For everything that was suspended, there were still funds available that had not yet been spent.
Which makes them an area you're going to look at when you're given a charge to balance a budget for FY15, not
Absolutely.
FY16.
Right.
FY15, okay? And so as the director testified to earlier, and correct me if I misunderstood something, that in those negotiations, which I wasn't privy to, I wasn't sitting there, you may have been, the director was, I'm sure, certain things, grants, other funding, other areas that you were looking at, you were told those areas, whatever they may be, whether they be grants for Department of Natural Resources or who knows what, legislative leaders told you those are off the table. Is that correct?
With regard, I don't understand. I don't believe I was told necessarily. Well, I'll take that back. On the transfers, yes, sir. On the transfers to local governments, we were told those were off the table and they were not included in the bill.
So those, I'm sorry.
There were some fund reallocations that we put on the table that we were told would not be allowed to be on the table, that could not be agreed to. That's correct.
So with that news during your budget negotiations, you then, to have to fill a bigger hole than what this General Assembly voted on, have to look at things you were not originally looking at to balance the FY15 budget, and you had to look at areas where there was funds available that had not been spent through grants for the fourth quarter. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. As difficult as that is, we can all share that, but you're being asked for FY15 in particular to pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Well, again, the budget passed, promised $100 worth of spending with $80 in revenue, and we sit here as two amongst a number of people who are responsible for pulling that back into balance. We certainly accept our share of responsibility for the decisions that are made, but we did not create the situation under which we sit today where we have to make these decisions.
I understand that.
Yep.
And I, again, your difficult decisions is almost incomprehensible of what you're having to do here. Nonetheless, you're charged with the duty to do that. I would, for one, just simply say that what I think a lot of the legislators, or maybe all of the legislators, were simply not aware of the fact that after we left here prior to the Easter break, we thought the hole had been fixed. And there was more to come. And that's where we can debate and discuss communication and how that can be improved. We've all been down that road, and you've talked to that. With that, the realities have hit. They're terrible realities that I have once again indicated earlier. I understand as a parent. I understand as a business person. I'm dealing with the state. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. And just speaking as the sponsor of the bill, I too, as did Mr. Brady, think that we had basically solved the problem with the legislation, House Bills 317 and 318 that we passed. So it was news to me too that apparently there still were gaping holes that only you knew about and that we did not. And let me just, a final comment. Yes, some things were off the table because they were not included in the bill, but I do believe the bill showed a particular enthusiasm on the part of lawmakers to protect programs like autism, like epilepsy, like programs for the developmentally disabled, and I wonder whether there might not be a tone deafness in the response of the bureaucrats who didn't understand that very loud, very clear message. But we do appreciate your participation in the morning's activities. Director Nuding, we know we're going to have you back because we haven't got to public safety and some of the other issues. Secretary Bassey, we are glad to know that you are not just a sidekick, but you're in fact the Secretary of the Department of Human Services. And
I know that I look very young, so that's the initial impression.
We appreciate your help this morning. You are dismissed. Director Nuding, we'd be grateful if you would stay for the discussion about the State Board of Education and the $97 million.
Leader, would you like me to stay at the table or just grab a seat?
You can sit in the first row.
Yep, thank you.
And if we could now have Robert Wolf and Amanda Elliott from the State Board of Education, if they have been patient enough to wait for their turn before the Budget Committee. Thank you, Mr. Wolf. You want to start off? Again, the question that the committee is asking is, we gave you in the appropriations bills, we gave you a lump sum $97 million that you could use in order to stave off disaster in any school districts that, because of the 2.5% cut, were perhaps going to find themselves about to close their doors. So our questions for you really are, how have you charted your course with respect to spending that $97 million? What criteria have you established? How far along are you in figuring out if indeed there are school districts that are going to be in trouble?
Thank you, Leader. And I'll quickly go through that criteria that we use, and it was approved by the State Board of Education on Wednesday, April 15th. The legislation that was passed did provide that $97 million, and it was to assist financially distressed school districts. The legislation pointed us and provided suggestive language on how to identify those two districts. The first criteria was every school district's designation on the annual school financial profile. And the legislation dictated that any school district in watch or warning, the two lowest categories on that designation, that they would be eligible for the hold harmless funding. Additionally, the legislation directed us and gave us the ability to consider school districts that provided evidence of having diminished cash on hand at the end of the fiscal year. So utilizing information derived from school districts' 2014 annual financial reports that have been audited, and taking information from school district budgets that school districts submit to the Illinois State Board of Education, we calculated an estimated ending cash balance for every school district in the state of Illinois. From that information, we calculated the reductions as a result of the appropriation reductions contained in House Bill 317, and we calculated an estimated cash on hand at the end of the fiscal year, considering the appropriation reductions. The last thing that we considered for school districts and their eligibility, we wanted to ensure that school districts that had the lowest amount of available local resources on a per pupil basis, and those districts with the highest concentrations of low-income students, that those school districts were eligible, because by those definitions, those are the school districts that are most reliant upon state funding. So with that criteria put into place, through the calculations of estimated cash on hand, we made decisions on who was eligible for the $97 million. The losses as a result of HB 17 for those districts that did qualify was far greater than the $97 million. So it caused us to go through a second tier, and again, going back to the legislation, the most financially distressed school districts, and we defined that as any school district that was projected to have 30 days of cash on hand or less would be eligible for 95% hold harmless funding. The balance of the school districts who, based upon either the criteria of low available local resources, high concentration of low-income students, or less than 180 days cash on hand, those districts were eligible for 73.5% hold harmless funding. The results in totals, we had 32 school districts that qualified for partial hold harmless funding at the 95% level. We had 546 school districts that were eligible for partial hold harmless at a 73.6% level, and we had 278 school districts that was not eligible for the hold harmless funding based upon the criteria approved by the State Board of Education.
And what, I'm sorry, what was the second category? What numbers of districts? 500 and something?
546.
Okay. And that was at the 74, whatever it was, percent.
That
and
is
what
correct.
was the next category, then the final category?
The final category were districts who did not receive it, who will not receive any of the 97. There were 278 school districts.
It sounds like you're doing this in the right kind of way, but two things that occur to me. First of all, I think our intent was not just to say, here's 97 million, spend it. It was to say, if there are going to be serious dislocations, totally crisis situations in some districts, here is a cushion. But it sounds to me as if your understanding of the legislation is that you should spend every penny of the 97 million, whether districts are at risk of some catastrophe or not. Is that right?
That was our understanding, and what we attempted to do for those school districts that the 32 had 30 days or less cash on hand, the 95% hold harmless at least brought them up in most instances to the number of days cash on hand that they would have had before the enactment of the appropriation reductions.
And I'm sure that those districts were on the cusp. I can't imagine that that was not the right decision. I'm a little less certain in my own mind that the 500 and plus districts were in quite such parlous a condition.
I cannot argue with that, but I will tell you the average days cash on hand for those school districts, the 546 was 159 days cash on hand. So they were not as in a precarious position as those 32,
right.
But it was our understanding that the 97 was to be distributed.
Okay, my thought had been that it was really for crisis management. And when it comes separate from the 97 million, when you're making the 2.25% cuts for everybody else, or however you're doing that, first, are you doing it on a proration basis, or are you doing it per pupil? And second, are you working with the Bureau of the Office of Management and Budget in making those determinations? What kind of communication has there been between the State Board and the Governor's Office of Management and Budget?
Well, to answer the question first about how the reductions were applied, for general state aid and the mandated categorical reimbursements, what we did was apply deeper prorations to those amounts.
So it was prorated, not per pupil?
That it was not prorated per pupil. It was prorated in the same manner as state aid, and the mandated categoricals were processed at the beginning of FY15.
Okay, and then on the second question?
The second question, I had conversations with Director Newting at various intervals since the enactment of Public Act 99001, and I informed him of the position and the recommendation that was taken to the ISB board.
And did they suggest otherwise, or were they happy with the decisions that you were making?
It was my understanding.
Maybe Director Newting would like to come back and share his thoughts with us.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I did have conversations with Robert. I wanted to understand what the State Board was using as the methodology. It was, in fact, I was unclear, frankly, when the bills passed, whether the $97 million should be spent. I did place some phone calls around to various staff to try and figure out if that was the intention of the legislature in passing that $97 million. I was advised that most believed it was the intent to spend the 97, and that's why that number was increased during negotiations. So the methodology that's been laid out to you today was completely an ISB methodology. My main concern to the State Board was that I didn't think it would be fair for a school district in the methodology to receive more money back through the methodology than they had actually lost as part of the appropriation reduction, and ISB's methodology had already taken that into account. But to me, I agree with you. I think the experts at the State Board did a pretty good job under difficult circumstances of figuring out a way to allocate the funds within the language that was in the appropriations bill.
Thank you. Representative Crespo.
Thank you, Leader Curry. I think, Director Newton, you answered my question in terms of who were the decision makers in this process. That was ISB? They're the ones?
The methodology that was put forward was ISB methodology, yep. Created by, maybe by Robert himself, but yes, sir.
So Robert, Mr. Wolf, this process, did this happen before or after we passed the supplemental bill?
This work began immediately after the enactment of House Bill 317.
Okay. And I was under the impression, as well as Leader Curry, that the $97 million was intended to sit there just to meet crises as they came about, not to be spent right away. The 32 school districts, they received 95%. You had a 73.6% for 546. Were there any school districts that qualified under this formula that were left out?
Any school district that met the criteria that laid out, which was less than 180 days cash on hand, in the lowest 2 quintiles for available local resource, or in the lowest or in the highest quintile for low-income students, every one of those school districts will and is scheduled to receive a hold harmless payment at some level.
What drove the 95% and the 73.6%? Was it the amount of money that was available in the school districts?
Yes. That was to calculate the loss attributable to the appropriation reductions, and the 95% and the 73.6 was a function of to get to that 97 million exactly.
Were there any exceptions to this rule? Did you have any of the school districts that did not qualify under any of these were able to get some money?
There were school districts that did not qualify under the criteria, and they will not be receiving any of the money. And as I stated, there were 278 school districts who did not qualify.
Is there an appeal process? If a school district feels, wait a second, we qualify under the rules that we've laid out, can they appeal? Well, if they appeal, it doesn't matter. The money's. Well, let me ask you this. Is the $97 million, has the entire $97 million been committed so far?
It was committed in the board approved this whole package on Wednesday last week that we put together criteria, and in the board materials was the allocation of the 97 million.
So that's been committed. So there's no more, there's no funds available. If there's even an appeal process, it doesn't matter.
That is, it would be mine unless there is a huge error that was brought to our attention based upon the criteria that we put in place, but I'm not aware of any error that was made at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wolf. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Wolf or for Director Newting? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for appearing this morning. One of the members of this panel had particularly wanted to engage in questions about the general cuts in education. Unfortunately, he was called to another committee, so we may have to ask you back, Mr. Wolf, at some point in the future, but maybe Representative Crespo and I covered his waterfront, and then you won't have to return. Okay. But we will see. All right. So no further business to come before the committee. Representative Harris moves that the committee stand adjourned. Not recessed. All in favor say aye. Opposed no. The ayes have it, and the committee stands adjourned. Thank you all very much.